It really is, it's funny how we just kind of accept the rhythm of our lives without ever really stopping to question the mechanics behind it all.
Oh, totally. We just go along with it.
Right, like you look at a calendar on your wall or, your phone, and there it is, 7 days in a week. Or you cross your fingers and just hope for a lucky number 7.
Yeah, it's baked into everything.
Exactly. And you plan your spring around these holidays, like Easter or Passover, which somehow, for some reason, just shift their dates every single year. They're bouncing all around the calendar in April or March.
While other holidays just stay perfectly fixed to a single day.
Right, right. And have you ever wondered why that is? Like, why our lives are boxed into these very specific numeric cycles and these shifting celebrations?
I mean, it feels completely arbitrary when you stop and actually think about it from our modern perspective.
Just totally random.
Yeah, like someone somewhere in the distant past just threw darts at a board and decided, yes, this is how humanity will measure its existence. We will work for 5 days, rest for 2, and look for eggs on a completely different Sunday every year.
Right. But it is not arbitrary at all. I mean, not even a little bit. If you trace it back, you don't find some random ancient bureaucrat making up a calendar in a stone room.
No, not at all.
You find the night sky. You find ancient people standing in the dark thousands of years ago, staring up at the stars and the moon. They were terrified and mesmerized and just, trying to decode the universe.
It's incredible to think about.
It really is. So, welcome to the English BookCast. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the hidden, ancient, astral origins of our most common beliefs.
We've got a really heavy one today.
We do. We are looking at a monumental and, frankly, just mind-bending book. It's called Symbols, Sex, and the Stars by Ernest Busenbark. And just to set the parameters, we're going to focus strictly on the first 7 chapters of his work today.
Right, and what's fascinating here is that Busenbark's overarching mission is really to strip away all those thousands of years of accumulated dogma. The theology, the modern interpretations, all of it.
He just scrapes it all right off the top.
Exactly. He wants to show us the raw, primitive foundations of human thought. So we are looking at how early humanity tried to make sense of the vast, just completely intimidating spectacle of the natural world.
Because it was terrifying, right? You didn't know why anything was happening.
Right. And this primitive human impulse to understand their environment, it led directly to moon and sun worship. And what Busenbark meticulously demonstrates, and I mean meticulously, is that these ancient astral cults, they didn't just vanish when new empires took over.
It didn't just go away.
No, they evolved. They became the hidden underlying architecture for modern religion, for mythology, and even the daily superstitions that, you and I still practice today without even realizing it.
Now, before we get into the really heavy mechanics of all this, I do want to give a quick heads up for you listening, because Busenbark is digging into the historical, anthropological, and mythological roots of some major religious texts.
Yeah, he goes right to the source material.
Including the Bible and the Torah. And he presents some very bold textual analysis and historical theories regarding how these faiths developed from much earlier astral worship.
He really does not hold back on making those connections.
He doesn't, but I want to be clear, we aren't here to validate or invalidate anyone's personal faith today. That's not the goal. We're really just playing tour guide through Busenbark's historical theories to see how the ancients viewed the world. We're just impartially exploring the connections that he draws.
Exactly. It's an exercise in ancient anthropology, essentially. We're trying to look at the sky through the eyes of someone living, say, 5,000 years ago.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Busenbark starts with a claim in Chapter 1 that, honestly, it completely caught me off guard.
The moon versus the sun.
Right, because when we think of ancient primitive worship, I mean, the absolute first thing that comes to mind is the sun.
Of course, it's the most obvious thing in the sky.
It's the big, blazing ball of fire. It brings life, it grows the crops, it keeps us warm. But Busenbark asserts that sun worship wasn't first. Not at all. He argues that moon worship actually preceded sun worship, and by a pretty massive margin.
It is a really counterintuitive thought for us moderns. Because, we live largely in these climate-controlled environments in temperate zones. We love the sun.
We go to the beach to lay in it.
Exactly. But to understand this, you really have to mentally transport yourself into the geographical context of early human civilization.
We're talking about the cradle of civilization, right?
Yes. Think about Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley. These were warm, equatorial, or sub-equatorial climates. The environment was entirely different from, say, a modern European or North American climate.
Right. These are places where the heat isn't just, uncomfortable. It is a serious daily threat to your actual survival.
Precisely. In these regions, the sun is not a gentle, comforting presence at all. It is a brutal, constant, and completely unyielding force.
It's the enemy, almost.
It really is. During those long, scorching days of summer in the ancient Middle East, the sun withers the crops, it dries up your vital water sources, and it just makes any physical labor incredibly agonizing, if not outright deadly.
Yeah, you don't want to be out in that.
And furthermore, from an observational standpoint, and this is key, if you are an ancient person trying to make sense of the sky, the sun is completely uniform,
It just does the same thing every day.
right? Day after day, it rises, it is blindingly bright, and it sets. Its apparent movement across the sky, and those very subtle shifts in where it rises on the horizon, those are way too slow and difficult to track easily without advanced mathematical tools.
You can't just casually notice that the sunrise moved an inch over the course of a month.
Exactly. And of course, the most obvious point, you can't even look directly at it without damaging your eyes.
So if you're an early human, the sun is this punishing taskmaster that you can't even look in the eye. You hide from it. You just endure it. But then the sun goes down.
And the night provides this profound physical relief.
Ah, I can imagine.
The biting heat dissipates. The world finally cools down. People can actually gather. They can talk. They can breathe easily. And ruling over this cool, comforting night is the moon.
Which is completely safe to look at.
Exactly. You can stare at it for hours. And most importantly, unlike the sun, it changes. It is highly visible, and its phases are dynamic. It passes from complete darkness to a delicate crescent to a brilliant, fully illuminated sphere. And it does all this in a very short, highly predictable period of time.
It's almost like humanity's first smartwatch interface or something.
I love that comparison.
Right, because it was this massive glowing dial in the sky that visually clicked through its phases. It gave early humans this tangible, highly visual way to organize their lives, their agriculture, and their social rituals.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it, because time wasn't initially reckoned by years. A solar year is a very long, highly abstract concept to a primitive nomadic or early agrarian society.
Yeah, how do you track 365 days without a written calendar?
Yeah, you'd lose count after a month. So time was first reckoned by sleeps, or nights. And then, as early humans observed the sky night after night, they realized that the moon's cycle from full to dark and back to full, it repeated reliably every 29.5 days.
Which is so specific.
Specifically 29.53 days. And once they grasped this, time began to be reckoned by moons.
And this is exactly where our modern 7-day week comes from, right? Because I always wondered why a week wasn't just, say, 10 days to make it a nice round number, or 5 days.
It all comes back to the lunar visual.
It's because that lunar cycle naturally divides itself into 4 distinct, highly visible visual phases. You have the new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, and the last quarter. And each of those visual shifts takes roughly 7 days.
That's right. The moon became the ultimate, what Busenbark calls the regulator or the measurer of existence.
The ultimate clock.
Exactly. And because the moon so visibly regulated time, early humans made this very logical, though scientifically flawed, leap of sympathetic magic.
Sympathetic magic meaning like causes like?
Yes. They assumed that the moon also regulated the physical events that occurred within that time.
Oh, I see.
If the moon controls the tides, which coastal people could clearly observe happening perfectly in sync with the lunar phases, then they deduced it must control all moisture, all liquids, and by extension, all life and growth on the planet.
Wow. And the ancient superstitions that Busenbark catalogs here in Chapter 2, they are just incredible. They really show how deeply this lunar logic permeated everyday life.
It was everywhere.
Yeah, like if you've ever checked a farmer's almanac or even just noticed people acting a little differently on a full moon, you're actually tapping into the exact same psychology. For instance, he talks about these Japanese carpenters in the 1st century, and they absolutely refused to use timber that was felled during a full moon. Which sounds crazy, but why did they do that?
Well, because the belief was that during the full moon, the lunar orb is at its most saturated, its most powerful. Therefore, it is actively pulling the maximum amount of moisture up from the earth and into the trees.
Oh, wow. So they literally thought the wood was full of water.
Exactly. Timber cut during the full moon was believed to be physically engorged with water. It would be too soft, too moist, and highly susceptible to rot, to warping, and to wood-boring worms.
That makes so much sense from their perspective.
If you wanted strong, dry wood for a house that would actually last, you had to cut it during the waning moon, as the moon was visibly drying up and retreating in the sky. The logic is completely flawless if you accept the premise that the moon controls all moisture.
I have to say, the internal logic of that is just brilliant. It really is. And it wasn't just wood either. It applied to everything in their lives. People would perform specific tasks based on whether they wanted things to grow or shrink.
Right. Personal health, agriculture, everything.
Yeah, they would cut their corns or pull weeds from their gardens strictly during the waning moon. The idea was that the affliction, or the weed, would physically shrink and disappear in sympathy as the moon shrank in the sky.
And conversely, if you wanted growth, you needed a waxing, growing moon.
Right. The book mentions the Orkney Islanders, who would flat out refuse to marry unless the moon was growing.
Because marriage is fundamentally about fertility, right? It's about growth and the building of a family legacy. To start a union during a dying, waning moon would be basically asking the universe for infertility or failure.
You'd be cursing your own marriage.
Exactly. And you see this reflected everywhere in global folklore. In ancient Iceland, it was believed that if a pregnant woman sat facing the full moon, her child would become a lunatic.
Wait, really? The word lunatic comes from that.
Yes, it's a word directly derived from luna, the moon. The implication was that the moon's rays had physically oversaturated the child's mind with moisture or energy.
That is wild.
And in certain Brazilian tribes, mothers would rigorously shield their infants from moonlight, fearing the heavy lunar moisture would cause sickness or respiratory issues.
It is just a complete worldview based entirely on celestial mechanics. And because the moon regulated agriculture, the tides, and human reproduction specifically, the roughly 28-day human menstrual cycle, which perfectly mirrored the lunar cycle, the moon naturally evolved in the human mind.
It had to. It was too important.
Right. It didn't just stay a mechanical clock. It became a person. It became a living, breathing, and incredibly powerful deity.
This is a crucial transition in human history, which Busenbark details in Chapter 3. The moon transitions from a simple timekeeper into the Great Mother, the feminine genitrix of the entire universe.
The ultimate creator.
Yes, because it rules the waters, and water is the source of all organic life, the moon becomes the ultimate symbol of the divine feminine.
And Busenbark lists the names she took on across different ancient cultures, and it just reads like a who's who of ancient mythology. You have Ishtar in Babylon, Isis in Egypt, Diana in Rome, Venus, Maya in India.
And they are all fundamentally the same figure.
Right. These aren't just separate random goddesses that different cultures made up independently.
Yeah.
They're all different regional masks for the exact same lunar mother goddess. They all share the same symbols, the same crescent moon iconography, the same absolute dominion over water and fertility.
And she is a very specific type of mother goddess. This is an important distinction. She's frequently referred to in these ancient texts as the virgin goddess of fertility.
Okay, yes. Now, we have to pause here because the ancient definition of the word virgin in this specific mythological context is very, very different from the modern literal understanding of the term.
Completely different.
Because I was reading that and thinking, how can you be a fertility goddess, right? A mother of all living things and a virgin all at once. It seems like a massive contradiction to our modern ears.
In the modern sense, it is a contradiction. But to the ancients, virgin did not exclusively mean physical intactness or celibacy. It meant an independent female who was completely sovereign. She belonged to no man.
Oh, so it was about independence.
Exactly. And more importantly, it referred to the moon's astronomical ability to constantly renew itself.
The phases again.
Right. Think about the lunar cycle. The old dark moon disappears completely. And then a brand new pristine silver crescent is born out of the darkness each month. The Great Mother constantly regenerates her own purity. She gives birth to the world, to the crops, to the celestial bodies, but she remains eternally self-renewing. Forever young, forever virgin.
Wow, that is beautiful. She's the ultimate independent source of life. But, it wasn't all just peaceful worship of a loving mother, right? There was deep terror involved in this, too.
Oh, absolutely. Terror was a huge part of it.
Specifically when the clock broke. Eclipses. I honestly can't even imagine what an eclipse must have felt like to someone who believed the moon was their literal life-giving mother.
An eclipse for a primitive lunar worshiper was essentially the end of the world playing out in real time, right above their heads.
Just pure panic.
Imagine your entire worldview. You believe this glowing orb is the mother of all life, your ultimate protector, the regulator of your crops and your families. And suddenly, for no reason, a massive, unnatural shadow begins to literally eat it.
And the temperature drops.
The temperature drops, the night gets unnaturally dark, the animals start freaking out.
And Busenbark says people literally envisioned it as a monster, right? Like a dragon, a jackal, or a giant sky serpent just swallowing the celestial body. They would panic, they would bang pots, throw stones, shoot flaming arrows into the sky, scream at the top of their lungs, all to try and scare the monster away and save the moon.
And of course, the moon always came back.
Which is the best part.
Right. Which, in their minds, completely reinforced their belief that their rituals worked. They believed their shouting and arrow shooting had successfully scared the dragon away.
We did it! We saved the moon!
Good job, everyone! We saved the universe.
But this terror of eclipses is where astrology and priesthoods begin to consolidate immense tangible power. Because eventually, Babylonian astrologers who had been meticulously recording the movements of the stars on clay tablets for generations, they discovered the Saros cycle.
Okay, stop right here, because when I read about the Saros cycle, my jaw literally dropped. What exactly is it, and how on earth did primitive people figure it out without computers?
It is a highly complex astronomical cycle. The Babylonians realized, through centuries of unbroken, meticulous observation, that solar and lunar eclipses repeat in an almost identical geometric pattern every 18 years, plus 10 or 11 days.
18 years.
Yes. The geometry of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun aligns in such a specific way that the shadows repeat on that massive cycle.
That is just an incredible feat of observational astronomy for the ancient world.
Oh.
It really is. They didn't have telescopes. They didn't have calculators. They just had generations of priests writing down dates on clay tablets, passing them down, until someone finally spotted the mathematical pattern spanning almost 2 decades.
Just staring at data until it made sense.
Exactly. And once the priest class understood the Saros cycle, they could accurately predict when the eclipses would happen.
And that is the ultimate superpower. I mean, think about the political leverage you'd have. If you are a high priest and you can confidently walk into the throne room and tell the king, on Tuesday at midnight, the great dragon will try to swallow the moon. The world will go dark. But if you give our temple enough gold, I will command the dragon to release it.
It's the ultimate shakedown.
It really is. And then Tuesday rolls around, and it happens exactly as you said. You effectively rule that society. You own the supernatural. You hold the leash to the cosmos.
You hold the keys to reality itself. The masses would be entirely dependent on your temple to keep the universe functioning. But, this raises an important question about the duality of the moon, which Busenbark explores very deeply.
Right.
If the full, bright moon was so beloved as a mother figure, the protector of life, where did all the evil, darker aspects of these ancient mythologies come from?
Yeah, I actually wanted to push back on this a bit while I was reading, because if the moon is the loving mother, why is there so much ancient myth about dark forces, tricksters, and destroyers? Are we really saying the entire concept of the deceiver or the devil figure just comes from the fact that the moon gets dark for a few days a month? Isn't that, I don't know, oversimplifying human morality?
It might seem like an oversimplification to us because we have thousands of years of philosophical and theological development behind our concepts of good and evil.
Right, we have so much baggage.
Exactly. But to the primitive mind, physical light was literally synonymous with life, warmth, and safety. Physical darkness was synonymous with cold, predators, and death. And the moon is inherently dualistic.
It has two faces.
Yes. It has an ascending, waxing phase where it brings light, it grows, and it encourages life. Right. But it also has a descending, waning phase where it actively retreats, it shrinks, and it brings darkness back to the world. That descending half of the lunar cycle became personified.
Oh, I see.
It became associated with the deceiver, the dark brother, the thief of light.
So the physical darkening of the moon inspired the mythic archetype of the two brothers fighting for control of the sky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see this everywhere in the foundational light versus darkness myths. For example, in ancient Egypt, you have the god of light, Horus, constantly battling Set, the demon of darkness.
Right, the classic struggle.
And Set is often shown with the head of a jackal. Now, why a jackal? Because a jackal is a nocturnal prowler. It's a scavenger that only comes out when the light is gone. He is the thief of light. The physical phases of the moon created the original universal template for the cosmic struggle between good and evil, light and darkness.
That makes perfect sense.
The moon wasn't just a clock. It was a moral theater playing out every 29 days.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the timeline here, the moon is the original boss. It's the great mother, the timekeeper, the source of light in the dark, the origin of good versus evil.
That's the foundation, yes.
But Obviously, that didn't last forever. As human civilization expanded and migrated, things changed drastically. We move out of the equatorial zones, which brings us to the solar takeover, which is detailed in chapters 4 and 6 of the book.
Yes, this is a massive, massive paradigm shift in human history. As populations migrated out of the warm, forgiving equatorial regions, places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, and they moved north into colder, more temperate climates like Europe and northern Asia, the environmental pressures shifted dramatically.
The weather changed everything.
In the north, the winter is a killer. The sun is no longer your brutal enemy. The sun becomes your absolute salvation. The cold and the darkness of winter will freeze you and starve you if the sun doesn't return to warm the earth.
And suddenly just tracking the moon isn't enough anymore, is it? Because if you only track time in 29.5-day cycles, your calendar eventually drifts completely out of sync with the physical seasons.
It drifts very quickly, in fact.
Right, because 12 lunar months is roughly 354 days. That's 11 days short of a true solar year. If you plant your crops based purely on a lunar calendar in a northern climate, within a few years your calendar will tell you it's spring, but there will be 3 feet of snow on the ground.
You'll plant in the middle of a blizzard.
Exactly. Your crops will die and your society will starve.
Huh.
You can't run a northern society on a moon clock.
Precisely. Agriculture in these new climates became heavily dependent on the rigid 365-day solar year. The seasons became the absolute matter of life and death, not just the tides or the weekly cycles. And so the celestial hierarchy flipped.
The sun takes the throne.
The sun stepped forward to challenge the moon for supremacy in the human pantheon. The sun became the supreme god, the bringer of the seasons, the hero who vanquishes the winter.
But here's the fascinating part. You can't just flip a switch and erase thousands of years of deeply ingrained lunar mythology. People love their stories, they love their heroes.
You can't just tell them, oh, we don't worship that anymore.
Right, so instead of erasing the old lunar heroes, the new solar priesthoods they rebranded them. They took the old lunar stories and rewrote them to star the sun. And Busenbark uses one of the most famous stories of all time to illustrate this, the story of Samson from the Bible.
This is a great example. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Busenbark is showing us how ancient hero myths are very often direct allegories for the sun's annual journey through the zodiac. He provides a meticulous line-by-line breakdown of Samson, not as a historical human figure, but as a composite solar deity.
Okay, let's look at Samson, because I remember the Sunday school version of this perfectly. He's this guy with tremendous superhuman strength. He has wild, long hair. He fights a lion. He gets tricked by a woman named Delilah who cuts his hair, and he loses all his power. How does that connect to the sky?
You have to look closely at the specific details the text provides. According to Busenbark's analysis, Samson's immense strength and his wild, luxuriant hair are symbolic of the sun in the absolute height of its summer glory.
Okay, summer sun.
The hair represents the sun's rays, the visual source of its power and its ability to bring forth life on earth. And specifically, the text notes that Samson had exactly 7 locks of hair.
Ah. And those 7 locks represent the 7 days of the moon's quarter, which we talked about earlier. But now, in this solar rebrand, those 7 days are adapted to represent the radiant, life-giving solar rays that govern the week.
Exactly.
So Samson is the blazing summer sun, completely unbeatable. But then, as the year progresses, he meets Delilah. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Delilah represents the enchantress of winter, the embodiment of darkness and the declining half of the year. When the story says she seduces him and cuts his hair while he sleeps, it is an astronomical allegory for the winter season, slowly stripping the sun of its radiant rays.
The day's getting shorter.
Yes. As autumn turns to winter, the sun's rays literally shorten. They lose their heat. They lose their power.
I picture it like an ancient battery running out of charge, or like a solar panel array. Samson is this massive, fully charged solar battery at the summer solstice. He's at 100%. But as the days get shorter, Delilah, the darkness of winter, is literally unplugging him or throwing a tarp over his solar panels, draining his battery day by day. By the time winter fully sets in, his hair is gone, his rays are cut, and his battery hits 0.
That is a very apt modern analogy. The solar panels are covered. Once the hair is cut, the rays are gone, the heat is drained. And what happens to Samson next in the story?
He gets captured.
He's blinded, he's bound with brass fetters, and he's thrown into a dark dungeon by his enemies to grind grain.
He is literally put into the dark doing the repetitive circular work of a millstone.
Yes, this perfectly symbolizes the winter solstice. The sun is at its absolute lowest point in the sky. Its light is weak, it is blind, its heat is gone. It is captured by the powers of darkness and cold. It is trapped in the dungeon of winter. But, as the myth assures us, Samson's hair slowly begins to grow back in the dungeon.
The battery starts recharging.
Exactly.
The days slowly start getting longer again after the solstice. The sun's rays return for the spring renewal, and eventually he gets his full power back and brings the whole temple down on the powers of darkness. It's just a perfect, closed-loop astronomical allegory.
And Busenbark argues that Samson is by no means unique in this regard. This exact motif, the invincible hero losing his strength, battling beasts like the Nemean lion or the bull of heaven, being conquered by a woman representing darkness or winter, and then rising again in glory, you find it everywhere.
It's universal.
It is found in the myths of Hercules in Greece, Gilgamesh in Babylon, Apollo, and many others. The names change depending on the local language. The specific details of the monsters shift based on local fauna, but the underlying astronomical reality they described remains exactly the same. They are all stories of the sun fighting the winter.
So we have these pervasive universal astral myths. The moon is the great mother, the sun is the dying and reviving hero. But how did these very physical sky-worshipping traditions impact the major monotheistic religions that we are familiar with today?
That's the big question.
Because you can't just flip from worshipping 100 stars to worshipping one invisible god without a massive struggle. Which brings us to ancient Judea, where Busenbark provides a very specific historical case study in Chapter 5.
This is a critical chapter for Busenbark's thesis, because when we think of ancient Israel today, we are heavily conditioned to think of a strict, unified monotheism existing from the very beginning.
Right, we picture Moses coming down the mountain with the tablets and everyone just immediately falling into line.
But Busenbark, relying on meticulous textual analysis of the Old Testament itself, points out that the reality on the ground was much more complex and heavily intertwined with surrounding astral cults.
He says that sun and moon worship wasn't just some fringe activity happening in secret caves. It was a widespread, culturally accepted practice among early Israelites.
According to the biblical text Busenbark cites, early Jews actively practiced astrology. They worshipped at high places.
Now, what were high places?
They were essentially hilltop altars, built intentionally on elevated ground to be physically closer to the celestial bodies they were venerating. They burned incense to the sun, the moon, the constellations of the zodiac, and all the host of heaven. Kings of Judah actually dedicated literal physical horses and chariots to the sun god, parking them right at the entrance to the main temple in Jerusalem.
Chariots to the sun right at the main temple. That shows how integrated this was. The sun god had a VIP parking spot at the holiest site in Judaism.
It was a major figure.
But obviously that pluralistic worship didn't last. The script gets flipped completely, and Busenbark points to a very specific moment in history where everything changes, the reign of King Josiah.
King Josiah initiated one of those aggressive, sweeping religious reforms in recorded history, and the catalyst for this reform is politically fascinating. According to the historical texts, the high priest, a man named Hilkiah, suddenly discovers a lost book of the law hidden away in the temple.
Just happens to find it.
Just finds it. And this book is widely understood by biblical scholars to be the core of the book of Deuteronomy.
Wait, let me make sure I have the mechanics of this right. They just happen to find this dusty old scroll that conveniently says, hey, all that stuff you guys have been doing for centuries, the high places, the sun chariots, the astrology, God actually hates that, and you have to stop immediately and only worship at the main temple.
That's the gist of it, yes.
They take this incredibly convenient book to a prophetess named Huldah, who rubber stamps it and says it's authentic. And then Josiah uses it to go on a literal warpath.
Josiah uses this newly discovered book as absolute divine authority to declare all local shrines outside of Jerusalem completely illegal. He prescribes the death penalty for astrologers, dreamers, and anyone practicing sympathetic magic or consulting familiar spirits.
A total purge.
He physically drags the chariots of the sun out of the temple and burns them in the Kidron Valley. He desecrates the high places, filling them with human bones so they can never be ritually cleaned or used again. It was a total, systematic eradication of the older, localized astral cults.
Based on Busenbark's analysis of the source text, I have to ask, was Josiah's discovery of the law a genuine archaeological miracle? Or was this a brilliant, sudden political maneuver by the priests, the Zedekite priests, to consolidate total power in Jerusalem?
Busenbark argues very strongly for the latter. He points out numerous glaring textual discrepancies. For instance, the earlier historical books covering the time of the judges, Samuel, and the early kings cover nearly 1,000 years of history.
A huge chunk of time.
Yet, throughout that massive span of time, the writers make almost no reference to the specific laws of Moses, the stories of Adam and Eve, or the deluge. The early prophets like Amos and Hosea complain bitterly about idolatry, but they never cite a written law of Moses as their authority. It's as if the book didn't exist.
So Busenbark is suggesting the book was written right then by the priests, essentially as a piece of political legislation disguised as ancient divine law.
Yes. He states that it is generally conceded by modern biblical authorities that these texts were put into written form around the 7th century BCE, just before Deuteronomy was quote-unquote found. By finding this book, the Zadokite priests in Jerusalem accomplished a massive, unprecedented centralization of power.
It's brilliant politics.
Think about the economics and politics of it. If you outlaw every local hilltop shrine in the entire country, where does every single citizen have to go to offer sacrifices, pay their tithes, celebrate festivals, and seek divine favor?
The main temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's a monopoly. They literally monopolized access to the divine. If you wanted to talk to God, you had to go through their toll booth.
Exactly. It was a shrewd, highly successful centralization of religious and economic authority. They drew a hard, uncompromising line of social demarcation between the Jews and their pagan neighbors, effectively outlawing the older universal astral cults in favor of a singular, national, invisible God.
Wow.
However, this unified monotheism faced another massive cultural shock not long after.
The Babylonian exile. Josiah's reforms happen, but then Jerusalem is conquered anyway, the temple is destroyed, and the Jewish elites are dragged off to Babylon as captives for decades.
And this exile radically altered their theology once again, because when the Jewish elite arrived in Babylon, they were not arriving in some primitive cultural wasteland. They were immersed in a highly advanced ancient culture that possessed deeply complex religious concepts, heavily influenced by Persian Zoroastrianism and Babylonian astrology.
The Babylonians had been mapping the stars and philosophizing about cosmic dualism for centuries at this point.
Right. And Busenbark notes that before the exile, the Jewish concept of God was somewhat tribal and earthly. Rewards and punishments happened here on earth.
Physical stuff.
Yeah, if you were a good person and followed the law, you got a long life, many children, and fat sheep. If you were bad, you got struck by famine, disease, or your enemies conquered you. There wasn't really a robust, fleshed-out concept of a glorious afterlife in the clouds or a fiery hell of eternal torment.
Which is so interesting. What did they think happened when you died then?
The early biblical underworld, often called Sheol, was largely similar to the Babylonian underworld. It was just a gray, silent cavern where everyone went, good or bad, kings and peasants alike. It wasn't a place of torture or reward, it was just a shadow existence.
Just a waiting room.
But during and after the exile, Busenbark shows that Jewish theology absorbed profound new ideas from their captors and neighbors. They adopted the Persian beliefs in a highly structured cosmic hierarchy of angels and demons constantly warring in the spiritual realm. They developed the concept of a future life, a paradise for the righteous, a resurrection of the dead at the end of time, and most importantly, a day of final cosmic judgment.
Which is absolutely wild to think about because those concepts, heaven, hell, angels, demons, final judgment, those are the absolute bedrock of modern Western religion. Billions of people base their entire lives around these concepts today.
They're foundational.
And Busenbark is pointing out that they were heavily imported from older Persian and Babylonian systems during the exile. The theology was constantly evolving, actively absorbing the astral and dualistic myths of the surrounding empires and integrating them into their own framework.
Which brings us perfectly to the culmination of this entire process, detailed brilliantly in Chapter 7. With the sun fully established as the supreme deity across various conquering empires, its annual life cycle, its birth, its growth, decline, and death became the ultimate, universal template for the story of humanity's savior. The solar year became a religious script.
The ultimate allegory. This is where Busenbark maps the life of the sun god directly onto the 4 cardinal points of the solar year, the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes. This part of the book blew my mind because it connects dots I didn't even know existed.
Let's walk through the year as an allegorical life, exactly as Busenbark meticulously lays it out. We begin at the winter solstice, which occurs around December 22nd.
It's the darkest time of the year, the shortest day in the northern hemisphere.
Exactly. Astronomically, the sun is at its lowest, weakest point in the southern sky. For 3 days, from December 22nd to the 24th, the sun appears to stand still on the horizon, which is what solstice literally means. Sun stands still.
Right.
In the mythic allegory, the sun god is overcome by the evil powers of darkness and winter. He dies, but he's reborn. And according to ancient astrology, at midnight on December 24th, as the 25th begins, the constellation of Virgo, the Virgin, is rising on the eastern horizon.
Okay, let me make sure I'm getting this. So the new sun, the returning light of the year, is born while the constellation Virgo is rising. So astronomically speaking, the new sun is literally born of a virgin.
Yes, precisely. It's written in the stars. And because it is the darkest, coldest depth of winter, the newborn sun god is often depicted in various mythologies as being born in a cave, a dark manger, or an underground grotto, representing the dark depths of the earth.
It all fits so perfectly.
From there, the days slowly start getting longer. The young sun begins to grow in strength. This takes us to the vernal equinox, around March 22nd.
Spring. This is when day and night are perfectly equal in length.
Yes, the young sun's strength now perfectly matches the power of darkness. A cosmic balance is struck. At this point, the sun physically crosses over the celestial equator. This crossing was immensely significant to ancient astrologers. The world is finally redeemed from the dark, cold grip of winter. Spring begins and life bursts forth.
The resurrection of nature.
Busenbark connects this astronomical event to the ancient origins of spring festivals, the joy of Passover, and the literal concept of crossification, the sun being mounted on the cross of the celestial equator to bring salvation, warmth, and spring to the earth.
The bringer of light overcomes the darkness by crossing the equator. The battery is charging rapidly now, and then he keeps growing, heading toward the summer solstice around June 21st.
The longest day of the year. The absolute peak of the sun's virility and power. Samson in his full glory. The crops are thriving. But paradoxically, the very moment of his greatest triumph is also the beginning of his inevitable decline. From June 22nd onward, the sun begins its slow retreat southward. The days slowly, imperceptibly at first, begin to get shorter.
He starts losing his hair, just like Samson. The tarp is slowly being pulled over the solar panels.
Yes. The power drains, leading us to the autumn equinox, around September 21st. Once again, hours of darkness and light are exactly equal. The sun is weighed in the cosmic balance, but this time the momentum is reversed. Darkness is winning. The sun is crossing the equator, but heading downward into the southern hemisphere.
The sun weakens, descends into the dark, bringing the death of nature. The leaves fall, the crops wither, autumn and winter set in. The earth becomes barren.
And in ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, and Roman calendars, this specific period was marked by somber festivals, assisting the passage of the dead through the underworld, mourning the loss of the sun's life-giving power. These ancient autumnal festivals echo strongly today in observances like Halloween, Samhain, and All Souls' Day. The fear of the approaching winter darkness was ritualized.
So what does this all mean? If I'm taking a step back and looking at everything we've covered, Busenbark takes these 4 exact astronomical dates, the winter solstice, the vernal equinox, the summer solstice, and the autumn equinox, and shows how they became the foundational laying stones for major religious events across completely different, geographically disconnected cultures.
He demonstrates that humanity's original universal religion was simply looking up at the sky and projecting human struggles onto the stars. Whether you're talking about Tammuz in Babylon, Attis of Phrygia, Osiris in Egypt, Apollo in Greece, or Mithra in Persia, the underlying astronomical framework is mathematically identical.
It's the same math.
The virgin birth at the winter solstice, the triumph over darkness and the crossing at the spring equinox, the decline in the autumn, and the death in the dark of winter. The names of the gods change, the specific rituals evolve, but the celestial clockwork remains exactly the same.
It is the story of the Earth's survival, written in the stars by a terrified ancient people and then translated into the stories of heroes and gods. It really makes you realize that the next time you look at a wall calendar or check your horoscope just for fun, or gather your family to celebrate a seasonal holiday, the spring or the dead of winter, you are not just participating in a modern tradition.
Not at all.
You are participating in a multi-thousand-year-old unbroken chain of astral worship. You are doing exactly what the earliest humans did, marking the time and hoping the light comes back.
Busenbark shows us that even when empires fall, when temples are burned to the ground, and when old gods are strictly outlawed by new kings and decrees, the deep-rooted mythologies never truly die. They survive by simply changing their names, adapting their clothes, and rewriting their dialogue to fit the new era.
They just get rebranded.
And this raises an important, very provocative question for you, the listener, to consider. If these ancient lunar and solar allegories are still silently directing our calendars, our 7-day work weeks, and our major holidays today, what hidden symbols and stories being created in our modern, technology-driven culture will survive for the next 3,000 years?
That's a huge question.
What modern myths are we building right now that will silently direct the lives of people who have completely forgotten where those stories originated?
That is a wild, slightly unsettling thought to end on. The idea that we are still fundamentally just looking up at the sky, trying to figure out the monsters in the dark, and passing those stories down. And folks, the conversation is absolutely not over. We have really only scratched the surface of Busenbark's massive work today.
There is so much more to cover.
There is. The remaining chapters of Symbols, Sex, and the Stars, where we dive into the intricate, often shocking details of sex symbolism, the mystic meaning of numbers, and the deep esoterica of the Kabbalah that will all be analyzed next time on the Deep Dive. Until then, keep looking up. Right, which means the very arches you walk under at your local bank, the layout of the streets you drive on, even the way we subconsciously orient historical buildings, it all traces back to this massive, forgotten biological blueprint.
Exactly. It's everywhere once you see it.
Yeah, and looking at these incredibly intricate, like overlapping ancient maps and star charts you've got spread out over the desk here, it really hammers home the sheer scale of the philosophical shift we are unpacking today in this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we are mapping out the core philosophy driving the ancient world, specifically the eras covered in this massive stack of historical research we're dissecting, we have to anchor ourselves to one inescapable reality.
And it's a reality a lot of modern people struggle with.
Right. All of these sun and moon cults, whether you are standing in the dust of ancient Babylon, the towering temples of Egypt, or, the hillside shrines of Greece, were, at their absolute core, fertility cults.
Yes, that is the fundamental baseline.
The ancient mind didn't look up at the night sky and see a bunch of burning gas and barren rocks suspended in some cold, meaningless vacuum.
No, not at all.
They didn't see the sky and the earth as inert, mathematically separate entities. They envisioned the entire universe, the whole cosmic mechanism, as a massive, functional, breathing sexual system.
And if you don't intentionally put those specific conceptual glasses on, the ancient world will look like a chaotic collection of primitive superstitions.
Which it wasn't.
Right, which it absolutely was not. It was a highly organized, internally consistent, and honestly brilliantly observant worldview.
Yeah.
If you try to apply our modern, highly sterile, mechanized understanding of celestial physics to these ancient monuments and texts,
you're going to miss the point entirely.
Completely. You're going to completely miss what the architects and the priests were actually doing. You will look at a stone pillar and just see a primitive roof support.
Right, just a column.
Exactly. You will look at a geometric carving and see abstract decoration. But what's fascinating here is that to the ancient mind, the creation of life wasn't some localized biological accident happening on the planet.
Okay.
The creation of life was viewed profoundly and literally as the earth herself, the great mother goddess, being continually impregnated by the light and the heat of the sun, the great father.
Oh, wow. So the actual sunlight was the male seed.
Yes. Every single sunrise, the shifting of every season, the planting of every crop, it was all viewed as a macrocosmic version of human reproduction.
Okay, let's unpack this, because they didn't just keep this sexual universe idea up in the clouds.
Oh, they grounded it.
Right. They mapped it directly onto the physical geography, the dirt and rocks they walked on every day, the mountains, the valleys, the cardinal directions. Geography was, quite literally, anatomy.
It completely reorients how you read an ancient map or understand ancient migration.
Yeah.
Think about how we use the cardinal directions today.
Yeah, north, south, east, west.
Right. They're purely navigational. To help your GPS orient your car on a grid.
Yeah.
But to an ancient Babylonian, Egyptian, or early Canaanite, the directions were profoundly personified biological states.
Okay, how so?
Well, the east wasn't just a bearing. It was the direction of returning light, returning warmth, and the sunrise.
Right, the dawn.
So by logical extension in a biologically driven universe, the east was the prime direction signifying life, birth, and the beginning of the generative cycle.
It was where the action started.
Exactly. It was the entry point of the divine seed. And conversely, the west.
Where the sun goes down.
Right, where that life-giving sun seemingly died or was swallowed up by the earth every evening. That was universally recognized as the land of the dead. the underworld.
The end of the reproductive cycle.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it makes sense intuitively. You watch the sun plunge into the horizon, the temperature drops, the darkness sets in. It feels like a death.
It does.
But the research points out that this anatomical mapping went way beyond just tracking the sun across the sky. It extended to the very topography of the land.
Oh, absolutely. The hills and valleys.
Yeah, they didn't just build altars and temples on hills because they wanted a scenic overlook, or even because, a high vantage point was easier to defend against an invading army.
No, that's our modern utilitarian bias talking.
Right. They deliberately sought out, or even artificially constructed, high places to represent specific parts of the female anatomy.
Yes, and you see that exact term, high places, pop up constantly in ancient texts.
Including as a major point of contention throughout the Old Testament, right?
Oh, heavily in the Old Testament. The historical consensus from the sources is that rounded hills, natural domes, and specifically constructed earthen mounds were explicitly likened to the breasts of nature.
Wow.
It wasn't a vague poetic metaphor. It was direct, literal naming. Take the mountain where the Greek god Apollo was said to be born.
Okay.
It was called Tithonia. Right. And when you trace the etymology of Tithonia, it literally translates to the nipple.
Wait, really? The nipple?
Literally. They believed the divine nourishing power of the Earth Mother was physically protruding from the landscape at these specific geographic points.
That is wild.
You didn't just worship on the mountain, you worshiped the mountain as a vital organ of the Divine Mother.
And then you have the center points, the navels. I've always found this fascinating because the research highlights the concept of the omphalos.
Yes, the omphalos, which is simply the ancient Greek word for navel.
But why the navel? If they're worshiping the earth as a living, breathing goddess, why wouldn't the center of the world be the heart or, the head?
Because of the biological focus, what is the navel? To a developing fetus, the navel, the umbilicus, is the singular point of connection to the mother.
Oh, right.
It is the conduit of life, nourishment, and energy. If the earth is the great mother and humanity is her offspring, then the most sacred spot on the map must be the umbilical connection to the cosmos.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. You look at the incredibly famous oracle at Delphi in Greece, the specific mountain there where the prophecies were delivered, where the earth seemingly spoke directly to humanity, was called Omphiel.
Omphiel.
Yes. This explicitly translates to the oracle of the sun, but it is derived from that exact same root for the navel or the umbilicus. It was the center of their biological universe.
And it wasn't just the Greeks doing this. This was a universal human application of anatomy to geography.
Completely universal.
We see the exact same thing happening in the Abrahamic traditions. The historical texts show the prophet Ezekiel explicitly declaring that Jerusalem is situated in the middle, or the navel, of the earth.
Yes, exactly.
And later, medieval churchmen and major theological figures like St. Jerome absolutely accepted this literal geographic worldview. They placed the site of Solomon's temple, Mount Moriah, as the umbilicus of the universe.
Which forces us to drastically change how we evaluate ancient engineering and architecture. Well, when modern people look at massive structures like the pyramids or the great temples, our contemporary bias immediately tells us to admire the math.
Right, the labor, the logistics of moving the stones without diesel engines.
Exactly. And while those things are impressive, to the builders, these weren't just buildings, they were functional, ritualistic machines.
Functional machines.
Yes, they were models of human reproduction scaled up to cosmic proportions. By building them, the architects believed they were actively participating in and facilitating the generative process of the universe.
Okay, let's unpack this. So imagine you're an ancient architect. You aren't just designing a place for people to sit and listen to a sermon.
Not at all.
You're essentially building a giant interactive anatomical model using stone, space, and sunlight.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
And the most mind-blowing example of this in the research is the Great Egyptian Temple at Thebes. I mean, the physical description of this place is staggering.
It really is.
You have this massive long avenue leading up to the temple, lined on both sides by these towering statues of ram-headed sphinxes.
Right, and the ram being a prime symbol of male virility and generative power.
Right. And this avenue leads to a very narrow temple entrance, which then transitions into a long, progressively darker, progressively narrower corridor.
Yes, going deep into the hidden center of the temple structure.
The Holy of Holies.
Exactly. The spatial psychology of the design is entirely intentional. It is meant to evoke the feeling of traveling deep inside the body.
Into the womb.
Precisely.
And then you have the astronomical alignment. It was oriented with such absolute mathematical perfection that on one specific day of the year, the summer solstice, when the sun reached its absolute highest point of virility and power in the sky.
The apex of its energy.
Right. A beam of sunlight would shoot straight down that avenue of ram stinxes. It would pass perfectly through the narrow entrance, travel the entire length of the dark internal corridor, and for just a brief, singular moment, it would violently illuminate the sacred image in the deepest, darkest sanctuary of the temple.
It is arguably one of the most stunning pieces of combined architectural and astronomical synchronization in human history.
It's unbelievable.
And the source material leaves absolutely no ambiguity about what this event represented to the Egyptians.
Right.
This was not merely a clever light trick designed to awe the uneducated masses. This architectural event was the literal, symbolic culmination of their theology.
The impregnation.
Exactly. It symbolized the direct impregnation of the divine seed into the womb of the great earth, mother by the sun.
Wow.
The temple itself was the womb. The sunbeam was the fertilizing phallus. The entire city, the entire culture, structured their sacred space around facilitating and witnessing this cosmic sexual union.
But wait, how did they calculate the solstice sunbeam alignment at Thebes so perfectly without modern surveying equipment or like advanced calculus?
Mind-boggling, right?
We are talking about hitting a target deep inside a building from millions of miles away.
It's a great question, and it speaks to their absolute obsession. They didn't have calculus, but they had centuries, millennia, really, of unbroken, obsessive astronomical observation.
I've been watching the sky.
Generations of priests did nothing but track the exact rising point of the sun on the horizon every single day. They marked the subtle shifts.
Yeah.
When you observe the sky with that level of existential dedication, because you believe the universe's fertility depends on your accurate tracking of it, you develop a highly precise empirical geometry.
They just brute force the math through time.
Exactly. They built the temple iteratively, aligning the foundations with the exact sight lines established by generations of naked-eye astronomers.
It really makes you think about how we design our modern spaces. Think about the last time you walked through a perfectly square concrete city grid.
Oh, it was night and day.
You look at our perfectly perpendicular intersections, our sheer glass box skyscrapers, our sprawling asphalt highways. When you contrast that with Thebes, you realize what a massive fundamental psychological shift occurred.
We completely disconnected.
Yeah, when humanity stopped viewing the landscape as a living, breathing, reproductive entity, we went from living inside a cosmic mother where every structure had a biological purpose to living on top of a dead rock, building utilitarian boxes.
It's a profound loss.
It really is a loss of visceral, empathetic connection to the environment.
That is a highly perceptive way to frame it. Because if every hill is a breast, if every cave is a womb, if every sunrise is an act of cosmic fertilization, you are never separate from the divine process.
You're part of it.
You are completely, inextricably embedded within it. Your very existence is a byproduct of the landscape's continuous fertility.
Yeah.
Modernity, with its focus on conquering and paving over nature, has largely severed that empathetic link.
So if they are mapping this divine reproductive geometry onto the stars and these massive stone temples, it's impossible that they'd leave it at the temple door.
Not at all.
This biological lens had to bleed into the mundane, the intimate, the things they carried with them.
It did, down to the very movements of their bodies. Before literacy was widespread, and frankly, even after it was, complex systems of pantomic acting and hand signs were heavily utilized across the ancient world.
Hand signs.
Yes. These weren't just simple waves or casual greetings. They were highly sophisticated, strictly coded systems used to pass secret information among religious bodies, trade guilds, and esoteric secret societies.
Like ancient Freemasonry kind of stuff?
Very much so. And a vast majority of these hand signs, when you decode the historical text, carried underlying sexual, generative, or combined male and female meanings.
The research even mentions how early Christian religious art paid obsessive attention to the pose and arrangement of hands on saints and virgins.
Oh, heavily.
Because those specific configurations of fingers were a whole hidden language communicating ancient generative concepts to those who knew how to read them.
Exactly. It was a secret dialogue in the paintings.
But let's jump to the most prominent symbol discussed here, because it is impossible to ignore, and it's basically the foundational icon of the Western world, the cross.
Ah, yes, the cross.
The historical record makes it incredibly clear. The cross predates Christianity by millennia as a potent sexual and fertility symbol.
This is a point that often causes significant cognitive friction for modern readers.
Oh, for sure.
But historically and archaeologically, the evidence is overwhelming. Long before it was ever associated with the Roman method of crucifixion, the cross was fundamentally a geometric representation of biological generation.
Okay, break that down for me.
To understand why, you have to look at ancient Eastern biological beliefs. In many of these systems, the right side of the body, specifically the right testicle and the right side of the womb, was believed to produce males. The left side was believed to produce females. So the crossing of the vertical and horizontal lines was not an arbitrary design. It was a literal graphic equation.
An equation.
Yes. It represented the union of the male and female principles, the intersection of opposites required to create life.
It's basically ancient biological algebra. Two intersecting lines equals life.
Precisely.
But hold on, I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
If we look at the earliest crosses, aren't we just looking at the absolute earliest human technology, like two sticks rubbed together to make fire?
Yes.
I just struggle to see how a basic survival tool immediately jumps to a highly esoteric symbol of biological reproduction.
That is exactly the right question to ask, but the answer actually reinforces the biological theory rather than dismantling it.
How so?
The historical research absolutely notes that the ancient method of pressing one hard stick against a softer piece of wood and twirling it rapidly to create friction fire is a parallel origin for the cross symbol.
Okay, so it is an intersection of two pieces of wood.
Right. In fact, that exact method is still used to create sacred fire in various Hindu temple rituals today.
Okay, so it is just about making fire then.
No, because to the ancient Hindu temple builders and early mythologists, the act of making fire wasn't just a utilitarian survival chore.
It wasn't.
Not to them. It was viewed as a profoundly generative, explicitly sexual act.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. The upright, hard stick twirling in the grooved receptive base was universally seen as the male impregnating the female receptacle to give birth to Agni, the divine fire.
Oh, wow.
So even when the cross literally represents making fire, it is still a biological reproductive symbol. To the ancient mind, there was no separation between physical phenomena like fire and biological procreation.
Because the universe only had one operating system, sex.
Exactly. Every action is a metaphor for the one great action.
Which brings us to the most famous and perhaps most beautiful variation of this biological algebra, the Egyptian Ankh.
Also known as the crux ansata.
Right. The historical texts trace the evolution of the Ankh beautifully. It didn't just pop into existence as a finished logo. It evolved from a primitive god of fertility, procreation, and life named Tot, or Dad.
Yes, and when you look at the earliest depictions of Tot, he wore a headdress of crossbars representing the four quarters of the earth.
Okay.
Over time, that complex fencer simplified and abstracted into the geometry we recognize today. You have the upright vertical bar, which the ancient texts explicitly identify as representing the phallus,
Right.
and sometimes, more specifically, the lower backbone or osacrum of the god Osiris, who is the lord of the underworld and rebirth. That upright bar is the T-cross, the active male element.
Okay. And then?
And then, placed perfectly right on top of it, resting on the crossbar, is the oval or the loop. This loop represented the female matrix, the womb, the door of life, the mouth of the goddess.
So when you combine them, the male T-cross inserted into or joined with the female loop, you get the Ankh.
Yes.
And what does the Ankh signify in Egyptian hieroglyphs? Eternal life and immortality.
Which makes perfect sense when you follow their logic.
Exactly. Because to the ancient mind, what is the only true, observable way a mortal organism achieves immortality? Through reproduction.
Yes, through the unbroken chain of generating new life to carry on the bloodline.
So the symbol of eternal life is, by definition, the symbol of sexual union.
It is the ultimate triumph over death. And what is truly fascinating from a sociological perspective is how this incredibly explicit ancient fertility symbol was adopted, absorbed, and recontextualized by later religions.
Specifically early Christians, right?
Yes. There is a specific illustration referenced in the research from a 1509 Venetian book, the Missale Romanum.
Okay.
It shows a Catholic priest wearing a pallium, a traditional liturgical vestment that has an Egyptian ankh clearly, undeniably woven right into the fabric.
Wow.
They were carrying this ancient sexual symbol of eternal life directly into the medieval church.
But why would they do that? I mean, did they not know what it meant, or did they know exactly what it meant and just hid it from the congregation?
It illustrates the crucial mechanics of esoteric versus exoteric meaning.
Let's unpack that.
Sure. To the masses sitting in the pews, the uninitiated, the exoteric audience, a cross on a priest's vestment was simply a holy emblem of Christ's sacrifice.
Or maybe just a stylized solar disk representing the light of God.
Right. But to the initiated, the architects, the scholars, the esoteric elite, it retained its ancient meaning.
Ah.
It was the biological equation of life. It was the ancient formula of reproduction hiding in plain sight. The masses read the symbol one way. The elite read it entirely differently. A symbol can hold multiple truths depending entirely on the literacy of the observer.
That is a wild concept. The idea that you could be worshiping in front of a symbol and the priest holding it is experiencing a completely different religion than you are.
It's a dual reality.
Which brings us, carefully but necessarily, to what has to be the most controversial variation of intersecting lines in human history.
Yes,
We have to talk about the swastika.
we do. And as historical analysts, we must maintain strict neutrality here. We have to consciously strip away the horrific modern associations to understand what this specific geometry meant to billions of people for thousands of years prior to the 20th century.
That's crucial.
Because long before modern history hijacked and weaponized it, the swastika was arguably the most universal symbol of health, happiness, and generative cosmic energy on the planet.
Yeah, the research refers to it in its early development as a sun snake.
A sun snake.
Right. It represented the four winds. In Buddhism, it symbolized the 10,000 truths of Buddha. It is actually carved into the famous ancient statues of Buddha's feet, the Buddhapada.
Yes, and its reach was global.
When Heinrich Schliemann excavated the ancient ruins of Troy in the 1870s, he didn't just find a few of them. He found the swastika on a vast quantity of pottery, weapons, and idols buried deep in the earth.
It was foundational.
It was drawn in red and white over the doorways of homes in India for good fortune. It was woven into baskets by Native American tribes. It was printed on medicine wrappers in China. It was literally everywhere.
And closely related to the swastika, as the archaeological record notes, is the triquetra.
Okay, what's that one?
It's sometimes called the feel-fought or the three-legged cross. You actually still see this symbol today.
Wait, really? Where?
It's the official seal of the Isle of Man, and it is prominently featured on the flag of Sicily.
Oh, the three legs in a circle.
Exactly. It's three legs bent at the knee, radiating from a central point. While the swastika often contained male and female combined elements representing cosmic rotation, the triquetra was specifically and universally a symbol of the male triad.
The male triad.
Yes. The central limb, or axis, represented the phallus, and the other two revolving limbs represented the testes. It was a symbol of active, moving male generative power.
Which perfectly explains some of the bizarre, seemingly nonsensical euphemisms we find in ancient texts, including the Bible. The historical research points out that the word foot or feet was an incredibly ancient slang term for the male genitals.
Yes, very common.
So when you read the book of Isaiah, chapter 7, verse 20, and it talks about the Lord shaving the hair of the feet,
Right.
or in 2 Kings when King Saul goes into a cave to cover his feet, or references to the water of the feet, these were direct, widely understood euphemisms.
They absolutely were.
The ancients were constantly finding polite or at least culturally coded ways to talk about this underlying biological reality.
And it raises a profound psychological question about the life cycle of symbols. You look at the historical record and you see a symbol, the swastika, that unequivocally meant health, sun, and 10,000 truths across multiple disconnected continents for millennia.
Right.
It was the ultimate symbol of cosmic motion and divine union. And yet we must ask ourselves, how deeply can a symbol absorb or lose meaning?
That's a huge question.
Can a geometrical shape with thousands of years of positive generative momentum be permanently, irreversibly overwritten by a single century of horrific misuse?
Yeah.
The ancient ubiquity of the symbol forces us to grapple with the sheer power of modern cultural erasure.
It's a heavy thought. A symbol can be an ancient language of life and a modern weapon of terror, all based entirely on the intent of the user.
Exactly.
But if simple intersecting lines like crosses and swastikas are the basic stick figures of creation, what happens when the ancients really started studying math? What happens when they moved beyond drawing lines in the dirt and discovered complex geometry?
It takes us out of basic sympathetic magic and into the highly advanced realm of sacred geometry.
Sacred geometry.
Yes, as ancient mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers began to master the principles of geometry, they didn't view it as secular utilitarian mathematics the way we do when we, say, build a bridge.
Right.
Geometry was a divine science. The shapes they mapped out weren't just arbitrary calculations or clever puzzles. They were believed to be the secret orders, the actual underlying blueprints of the universe employed by the great architect.
So, drawing a shape with a compass and a straight edge was like literally mapping the mind of God.
Essentially, yes.
Let's break down the specific shapes the research provides, starting with the absolute basic building block of advanced geometry, the triangle.
Mhm.
The texts explain that an equilateral triangle with the apex pointing downward represents water. But why? What is the visual or philosophical link between water, downward motion, and the feminine?
It comes back to observable physics and anatomy.
Yeah,
Water naturally seeks the lowest point.
right. Gravity.
Exactly. It acts through gravity, it descends, it fills whatever receptacle it is poured into. It represents yielding, receptive, nourishing energy.
Okay, that makes sense physically.
And anatomically, when you look at the human body, the downward pointing triangle maps perfectly to the shape of the pelvic region, mons veneris.
Ah.
Therefore, the downward triangle is the ultimate geometric reduction of the female receptive nature.
Got it. So conversely, when you flip that shape and the apex of the triangle is pointed upward, it represents fire. Flames reach upward to the heavens. They are active, consuming, ascending. It represents the male principle, the active, penetrating force.
Perfectly said.
So you have water and fire, female and male, earth and sky, all reduced to two simple triangles.
Exactly. And the true magic of sacred geometry happens when you bring them together. What happens when you overlap them?
Let's see.
You take the downward pointing female water triangle and you interlock it precisely with the upward pointing male fire triangle.
You get the six-pointed star, what we commonly know today as the Star of David or the Seal of Solomon.
Yes.
And based on this historical analysis, this star is not just a cultural or national badge. It is the ultimate perfected symbol of the marriage of male and female, of fire and water.
It's pure balance.
Right. It is the visual representation of the reproductive cycle that fuels all existence, perfectly balanced and locked together in geometric harmony.
The historical record is incredibly rich here. To the ancient Hindus, this exact six-pointed star represented the cosmic union of the gods Vishnu and Shiva. It was deeply identified with the mother goddess and the 6 days of creation. And the research provides a fascinating linguistic and Kabbalistic parallel from the Hebrew tradition that mirrors this geometry perfectly.
I love this part.
It notes that the ancient Hebrew letters for fire, which is the male element, and water, which is the female element, when combined together, form the word Ashmin, or Shamayim, which translates to heaven.
Wait, heaven is literally the combination of fire and water.
Yes, and it goes deeper. This combined word was often used by the initiated as a substitute for the unpronounceable, ineffable name of God, Yahweh.
Wow.
Furthermore, instead of pronouncing Javeh, Jewish scholars and mystics often referred to the divine as the name spelled Ash.
Osh, okay.
And when you break down Ash Kabbalistically, those specific letters correspond precisely to fire, water, and earth, the generative elements composing the universe.
So the six-pointed star is basically the geometrical spelling of the name of God, which itself is a linguistic formula of male and female coming together to create heaven and earth.
It's all connected.
The density of that symbolism is staggering. It's math, biology, and theology all layered into a single shape.
It really is.
And then you have the five-pointed star, the pentagram. The research notes this was a symbol of the universe, of perfection. It was heavily used by the Pythagoreans in ancient Greece.
Yes, the Pythagoreans revered it.
It was used in both white and black magic, representing the 5 sources from which all things come, or the 4 elements governed by the ruling spirit.
And we see these overlapping complementary concepts of dualistic creation absolutely everywhere once you know what to look for. The research mentions the Chinese concept of yin and yang, the great monad.
Right.
It's visually different from the six-pointed star, but philosophically, it is exactly the same concept. It's the profound interdependence of male and female, light and dark, active and passive forces locked together in a perfect circle of creation.
It's the same math, just drawn with curves instead of straight lines.
Exactly. The research also highlights the Egyptian Ujat, or the Eye of Horus and Ra.
Oh, the Eye of Horus. Everyone knows this one. You see it on everything in Egyptian museum exhibits. It's that really highly stylized eye with the swooping, almost teardrop line underneath it.
Yes, and the text explains that in its original ancient form, this eye wasn't just a decorative motif.
It wasn't.
No, it was a highly potent amulet worn by the living to protect against bad luck, and heavily utilized to assure good health and general well-being. It was painted meticulously on the sides of coffins and carved into mortuary articles,
Why on coffins?
because it represented the disk of the sun exactly on the horizon, symbolizing the transition point of life after death and eventual resurrection.
Ah, rebirth.
Once again, it is intimately tied back to the generative, life-giving power of the sun impregnating the earth.
Think about how deeply these geometric shapes are embedded in our modern subconscious. We still use stars for everything today.
We really do.
We put 5-pointed stars on our national flags. We give gold stars to kids in school to denote excellence. We associate them with magic wands and wizards in pop culture. We plaster them on military vehicles.
And we do it completely blind to the origins.
Exactly. We do all of this without having the absolute slightest idea that we are utilizing symbols that originally mapped to ancient physics, Kabbalistic elemental properties, and literal human reproduction.
It's true.
It's like we are using an incredibly complex software program. We know which buttons to click to get a result, but we have absolutely no idea how the underlying source code was written.
That is a brilliant analogy. You are merely interacting with the surface-level user interface.
Yeah.
But the source code was written millennia ago by people who believed that if you drew the math correctly, if you carved the geometry perfectly into the stone, you could literally tap into the generative power of the cosmos.
It's basically ancient hacking.
The geometry wasn't symbolic of power. The geometry was the power.
So if they are mapping this divine reproductive geometry onto the stars, the massive stone temples, and the secret hand signs of the priests, it's impossible that they'd leave it at the temple door.
Absolutely impossible.
This biological lens had to bleed into the mundane, everyday objects they interacted with inside their own homes.
It certainly did. If the universe is a sexual system, then everything within it must be categorized by its reproductive function. There is no secular space in this worldview.
Everything is sacred.
Yes. The rule of thumb in ancient symbology, as laid out extensively in the historical texts, is strikingly straightforward once you grasp the underlying logic.
Okay, lay it on me.
Any object that is naturally concave, any object that is designed to act as a receptacle, bowls, cups, basins, baskets, architectural arches, open doorways, arcs, boats, and rings, was universally categorized as a female symbol.
Receptacles are female.
Right. It represented the yoni, the womb, the dark, protected container of life.
And on the exact flip side, any object that was protruding, upright, or designed to penetrate tall poles, stone pillars, spears, watchtowers, clubs, and even agricultural tools like the hoe and the plow.
Because they penetrate the earth to plant seeds.
Right. Those were definitively male symbols. They represented the phallus.
The saturation of this dualistic symbolism in the ancient world is truly profound. It colored how they interacted with everything.
Yeah.
But perhaps the most enduring, mathematically beautiful, and widely disguised of these symbols discussed in the research is the Vesca.
The fish bladder.
Great fish bladder, yes.
This is one of my favorite parts of the research because it is absolutely everywhere in Western art history, just hiding in plain sight. Let's break down the mechanics of this shape. How do you draw it?
It is the foundational act of sacred geometry. You take a compass and draw a perfect circle.
Okay.
Then you place the point of the compass exactly on the edge of that first circle, and you draw a second, identical circle.
Right.
The shape created in the middle, where the two circles overlap, an oval with pointed ends, resembling an almond or a football, is the Vesca.
And the mathematical perfection of it is stunning, but the biological meaning is what matters here.
Yes, the meaning is everything.
The research makes it unequivocally clear that the Vesca was the supreme, paramount geometric symbol of the female matrix, the yoni. It was also intimately tied to the intense, widespread, ancient symbolism of the fish.
Right.
But why a fish? Because fish produce eggs by the millions. They were the ultimate creatures of immense fecundity and fertility in the natural world.
Exactly. So here is the great historical cover-up, the artistic workaround that the texts expose.
Let's hear it.
As Western society slowly transitioned from pagan nature worship into the dominance of the Christian era, The church couldn't just abruptly abandon these deeply ingrained, powerful symbols that the population had relied on for millennia.
People would revolt or just not understand.
Exactly. They had to absorb and rebrand them. So you look at Renaissance art or medieval cathedral carvings, and you constantly see the Virgin Mary, or Jesus Christ, or even Buddha in Eastern art, standing or sitting entirely inside this giant pointed oval shape.
Right. If you go to a museum and ask a polite modern art historian what that shape is, they will tell you it's a stylized halo.
An aureole.
Right, they call it an aureole or a mandorla. It's just glowing divine light.
But the historical source material is explicit. Despite that polite, sanitized modern myth, to the artists of the Renaissance, to the esoteric orders, and to the initiated elite, it held its absolute original ancient meaning.
The female matrix.
Yes. Placing a newly worshipped deity perfectly inside the Vesica Pisces was a literal, graphic representation of them coming forth from the divine female matrix. It was the door of life. They were showing the new God being born through the ancient geometry of the mother goddess.
So put yourself in the shoes of an ancient person walking around their village. Think about what their daily psychological reality was like.
It's hard for us to even fathom.
If you believe this historical research, they lived in a state of constant, pervasive religious and biological observation. Every single time they poured water into a clay bowl, every time they walked through an arched doorway into a building, every time they picked up a spear or watched a plow break the soil, they were consciously interacting with the sexual implements of the gods. Their entire physical reality was vibrating with this reproductive energy.
It really forces us to seriously speculate on the nature of modern consumerism and how we interact with our physical environment today.
Yeah, how so?
Over the centuries, we have completely stripped our physical world of this intense, symbolic weight. Today, a bowl is just a mass-produced piece of cheap ceramic you eat cereal out of while looking at your phone.
It's just stuff.
Exactly. A doorway is just an architectural necessity to keep the rain out. A spear is just a museum artifact. We have systematically traded a world imbued with intense, almost overwhelming spiritual and biological meaning for a world of sheer sterile utility.
It's the difference between living every moment of your life inside a sacred temple and living in an Amazon fulfillment warehouse.
That's a great way to put it.
And this intense categorization didn't just apply to man-made objects like bills and spears. We see that the untamed natural world of the flora, the fauna, the uncarved rocks on the hillside were all drafted into this vast reproductive system.
The animal kingdom was deeply, heavily symbolic. Ancient humans observed animal behavior closely and mapped those traits onto divine principles.
Okay, like what?
Creatures like serpents, dragons, and turtles were heavily identified with immortality, immense fecundity, and specifically, the phallus.
Well, the snake's the most obvious one. It has an obvious physical shape, but it also has the ability to shed its skin and appear literally reborn, fresh and new.
Yes, the shedding of skin was huge.
It was a paramount symbol of male generative power and life renewing itself.
Which is precisely why the serpent was deeply associated with ancient healing. That is why, even today, the universally recognized symbol of the medical profession is the staff of Asclepius.
The pole with the snake.
Yes, a central pole with a serpent wrapped around it. We're still using ancient phallic symbols of life force to represent modern hospitals.
The text mentions the Oracle of Delphi again here, noting the priestesses who delivered the prophecies were actually called snake women.
They were, yeah.
And then you have the contrast with the sky, with birds. Doves, specifically, are recognized today almost exclusively as symbols of the Christian Holy Spirit, or maybe peace.
Right.
But originally, the historical record shows they were the prime sacred symbols of the great female goddesses of antiquity: Ishtar, Semiramis, Astarte, Venus.
The goddesses of love and fertility.
So you have the serpent on the earth and the dove in the sky, the male and the female principles in nature.
And this intense reverence extended beyond living animals to inanimate nature as well. The sanctification of massive stones is a foundational part of ancient religion across the globe.
Like Stonehenge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Large, upright, unhewn stones, menhirs, dolmens, cromlechs. We get the massive, awe-inspiring pillars at Stonehenge or the standing stones in Brittany.
Right.
These were not merely territorial markers or primitive calendars. They were believed to be witnesses of God, and they were explicitly phallic pillars. They represented the unyielding generative power of the male deity physically penetrating the earth.
And the research describes this incredible, almost unbelievable ritual regarding stones that weren't upright, but rather stones that had natural holes, cavities, or deep fissures in them.
Yes, the clefts in the rocks.
The act of physically squeezing or passing a person, sometimes a sick person, sometimes a child, through a cavity, or a split in a massive rock, was viewed as a literal physical purification rite. It was a symbolic rebirth.
Because you are passing the physical body through the physical yoni of the Earth Mother to be born anew, purified of your past sins, your illnesses, or your bad luck.
It's sympathetic magic at its most visceral and literal.
Sympathetic magic is the crucial operating system you have to understand to decode the ancient mind.
Okay, let's define that clearly.
It is the absolute belief that by mimicking or honoring the processes of nature, you can actively influence and compel those processes.
Oh, it's an action.
Right.
Yeah.
You want the earth to be fertile and your crops to grow. You don't just sit and pray passively, you actively enact fertility. This brings us directly to the ancient reverence for trees. Trees, particularly deep-rooted, long-living species, were seen as the dwelling places of local spirits and divine energy. The oak, the pine, the ash, they were all deeply sacred.
The biblical texts specifically call out the groves or asherim that are constantly mentioned as a massive problem for the monotheistic prophets.
They were always fighting against the groves.
Yeah, the prophet Ezekiel is always furious, complaining bitterly about the Israelites abandoning the temple and going into the groves to worship. These weren't just nice public parks with good shade.
Not at all.
These groves contained living trees and specifically carved wooden poles that were explicit, undeniable phallic representations of the Canaanite fertility gods.
Exactly. And the maypole is perhaps the most enduring, fascinating survival of this specific branch of sympathetic magic.
The maypole, really?
Yes. Think about it. You have a tall, straight wooden pole erected right in the center of the village during the spring, which is obviously the season of returning fertility and agricultural rebirth.
So when people in a quaint European village or at a modern spring festival dance around a maypole today, weaving colorful ribbons around a tall wooden shaft driven deep into the ground,
Yes.
they are essentially participating in an ancient, explicitly reproductive ritual without having the absolute slightest idea what they are doing.
They are completely acting out a fertility rite.
Yeah.
The custom survives with all of its joyous, springtime, community-building energy, but its original literal meaning has been entirely scrubbed clean by centuries of cultural sanitization.
We just do the dance.
We keep the choreography, but we throw away the script, which perfectly sets the stage for the final, massive historical shift discussed in our source material.
Right. And this is the natural, glaring follow-up question that anyone looking at this history has to ask.
It is.
If the ancient world was so incredibly open about all of this, if they viewed sex as the divine, foundational driving force of the universe, and their temples, tools, trees, and maps all explicitly celebrated it, how on earth did we get to the modern era?
A huge pivot.
How did we get to the prudery, the bodily repression, and the deep-seated shame that characterized so much of the last 2,000 years of Western history?
According to the historical texts, it wasn't a gentle transition. It was a violent, massive pendulum swing.
A total backlash.
Exactly. Popular sentiment eventually moved drastically away from pagan nature worship. As new philosophies, ascetic movements, and particularly Christianity in the West, gained political and cultural dominance, they pushed the cultural mindset toward the absolute opposite extreme.
Right.
If the ancient pagan world celebrated the physical body and sexual generation as the highest, most divine acts of cosmic participation, the new paradigm sought holiness in the absolute rejection of those acts.
The research outlines this incredibly harsh pivot. You suddenly get the rise of extreme asceticism and self-mutilation as a sign of ultimate devotion to God.
The anchorites and hermits.
Yeah. Strict, unyielding celibacy becomes the ultimate religious ideal for the priestly class. The human body goes from being a sacred temple of divine generation to being viewed as a corrupted source of sin that must be hidden, denied, and punished.
It's a massive psychological shift.
The sexually imperfect men, the eunuchs, who were previously highly venerated priests of the goddess in some ancient Near Eastern cultures, were suddenly denied admission to the house of the Lord under Mosaic law. It was a complete 180-degree inversion of cultural values.
Yet, and this is where linguistics provides such a brilliant window into history, the text provides fascinating breadcrumbs, showing how the old mindset lingered in the very words the new society used.
Okay, this blew my mind.
Take the incredibly common legal word, testify.
Testify.
When we testify in court today, we swear an oath to tell the truth. But the origin of that word, as the historical source points out, comes from the ancient patriarchal practice of swearing a binding oath by placing a hand under the thigh or directly upon the tests of another man.
Wait, really? The testes.
Yes, because the testes were considered the source of life.
That is insane.
They were the source of the divine generative spark, and therefore the ultimate, most sacred source of truth and binding power. You weren't swearing on a book. You were swearing on the very mechanism of cosmic creation.
It's incredible the language remembers exactly what the culture desperately tried to forget.
It always does.
And to really understand how far and how hard the pendulum swung toward repression, we have to look closely at what they were reacting so violently against.
Yes, the context is everything.
The historical record dives deeply into the ancient practice of religious prostitution. Now, we have to clarify, this wasn't prostitution in the modern, purely transactional, secular sense of the word.
No, it was deeply theological. In earlier times, because of that pervasive concept of sympathetic magic we discussed, the people genuinely believed that ensuring the fertility of the crops, the herds, and the survival of the community required actual physical sexual acts to be performed as a cosmic catalyst.
In massive temple complexes across Cyprus, Babylon, Syria, and Phoenicia, religious prostitution was practiced as a direct, holy sacrifice to the mother goddess.
It was a duty.
Women would serve in the temples, and engaging with them wasn't a vice. It was an act of mandatory worship intended to actively stimulate the generative powers of nature.
Yes.
The research even points to the biblical story of Tamar and Judah in the book of Genesis as a prime example reflecting how pervasive and normalized these customs were.
That story is very telling.
Tamar veils herself and sits by the side of the road, and Judah immediately assumes she is a sacred temple prostitute, not a common streetwalker, because that was a recognized cultural institution of the era.
Furthermore, the naked body itself, or explicit phallic images, were not hidden away in shame. They were actively used as defensive magic.
Defensive magic.
Yes. The historical sources note that displaying the naked body or carving exaggerated sexual organs on city walls or protective amulets was believed to be a powerful safeguard to drive away evil demons and disease.
Because demons represent death and decay, so you flash them the ultimate symbol of life and creation to repel them.
Precisely.
It was the ultimate assertion of life force against the forces of death.
So when we pull back and view this massive, sprawling historical arc, what do we see? We see a profound psychological whiplash. Humanity goes from enacting literal temple prostitution to ensure the crops grow, to enforcing strict, self-mutilating celibacy to ensure the soul is saved from the perceived corruption of the flesh.
It's a complete inversion. But I have to ask, are they really that different at their absolute core?
That's the million-dollar question.
Think about it. Whether a culture is worshiping sex through elaborate public temple rites or obsessively repressing it through draconian purity laws and asceticism, they are still fundamentally entirely obsessing over the exact same biological force.
Two sides of the same coin.
They have just moved from venerating the engine to being terrified of the engine. But sex remains the absolute inescapable center of their spiritual anxiety and focus.
That is the crucial, culminating insight of this entire analysis. Extreme repression is very often merely the dark shadow of an original extreme reverence.
Yeah.
Our modern societal hang-ups, our complex, often contradictory neuroses surrounding the physical body, censorship, and reproduction might very well just be the echoing, distorted remnants of those ancient Babylonian and Egyptian fertility cults.
We just forgot where the rules came from.
We are still wrestling with the exact same cosmic biological engine that drove the builders of Thebes. We've just completely lost the original operating manual.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to take with you today. The next time you walk into a major historical building, a towering Gothic cathedral, a classic columned courthouse, or even a grand old bank downtown, stop just looking at the surface.
Look deeper.
Look up at the sweeping arches. Look at how the entire structure is oriented to the rising sun. Look at the intricate, interlocking geometric patterns carved deep into the floor or the woodwork. And ask yourself, are you just looking at mere arbitrary decoration chosen from a catalog, or are you actually walking through a massive frozen stone blueprint of ancient human biology? Are you standing inside the anatomy of the gods? We've only just scratched the surface of how deeply the stars and these ancient biological symbols quietly dictate human history and our physical world. Next time, we are going to dive into the rest of this massive book, unpacking the deeply mystical meanings of numbers, the hidden secrets of the Kabbalah, and the true, bizarre origins of astrology itself. Have your notes ready.
You look at a number today, like, say, the number 10 or 7, and it's a completely dead utilitarian thing.
Right, it's just a placeholder.
Exactly. It's just the battery percentage on your phone or, the change you get back from buying a coffee. It's totally mundane. But when you dive into Ernest Busenbark's anthropological breakdown of early human thought, you realize that for these ancient civilizations, numbers were like loaded weapons.
They really were.
They weren't just tools to count sheep. They were the literal physical blueprints of divine reality. The universe was actively speaking to them through mathematics. And so our mission for this deep dive is to completely decode that source code.
Oh, it's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, we're unpacking the esoteric meanings of numbers, the celestial origins of astrology, the vast astrological ages of the gods, and we're even tracing the ancient geometric roots of the Holy Three, or the Trinity.
Right, but I think, actually, before we get too deep into the weeds here, I just want to establish a quick baseline. Because we are looking at this purely as a historical, astronomical, and, comparative study of ancient myth today,
Huh.
we are not taking any kind of theological stance here.
Right.
I'm not endorsing or attacking any religious beliefs, and neither are you. We are merely unpacking the author's fascinating compilation of ancient myth and how it connects to early astronomy.
Exactly. Just looking at the historical data. So going back to numbers, it was a completely different paradigm of reality for them.
Yeah.
A completely different paradigm. And if we want to understand how our ancestors survived, we really have to strip away our modern complacency.
What do you mean by that?
Well, early humans were surrounded by a terrifyingly random environment. I mean, you could have a perfect harvest one year, and the next a sudden drought or a swarm of locusts completely wipes out your village.
Right, you had no control?
None. A solar eclipse wasn't some cool astronomical event you watch with cardboard glasses on your porch. It was a cosmic terror. The sun, which is the source of all warmth and life, was seemingly being eaten alive by the darkness.
That is terrifying, yeah. So how do you find psychological comfort in that level of daily chaos? You look for patterns. You desperately search for an underlying predictable order. And the most immutable order in the universe is mathematics.
2 plus 2 is always 4, no matter what the weather's doing.
Exactly. If the world operates on a strict geometric and numerical logic, it means it's not just a chaotic torture chamber. It can be measured. It can be understood.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's really about control, or, at least the illusion of it. Which brings us to the actual source code they were looking at. Busenbark spends chapters 16 and 17 heavily focused on the Kabbalah and this ancient global obsession with specific numbers.
Yes, the Kabbalah is central to this.
And the absolute heavy hitter, the king of the numbers, is 10. Now, I think it's easy for us to assume this is just because we have 10 fingers, so a base 10 counting system is just natural. But to the ancients, 10 was the absolute ceiling of perfection, wasn't it?
It was. It was the number of absolute completeness. But what's fascinating here is the physical geometric breakdown of the number 10. That's what is so wild. They didn't just see a 10, they saw a 1 and a 0.
Wait, really? Like binary?
Basically, yes. And we have to remember how visceral and, biological early human symbolism was. In the very earliest forms of human worship, survival and the continuation of the tribe were literally the only things that mattered.
Right, fertility was everything.
Fertility was everything. So initially, you had very realistic representations of human anatomy used as fertility symbols. But as civilization advanced, as abstract thought developed in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, these literal biological symbols were refined into pure geometric shapes.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. The 1 was viewed as an upright pillar, a straight shaft. This represented the masculine generative principle. The 0 was the circle, or the oval, representing the feminine generative principle, the womb of nature.
So you bring the straight line and the circle together, the male and the female, the 1 and the 0, and you literally get the shape of the number 10.
Precisely. Completeness. The generation of all life. It represented all production, the supreme power of creation.
That is mind-blowing.
And this wasn't just a vague philosophical concept either. It was baked into the very language of their sacred texts. We see this explicitly in the Hebrew alphabet.
Right, because their letters were also their numbers.
Exactly. The letters themselves functioned as numbers. The 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the letter Jod. Because it occupies that 10th position, it automatically held that numeric value of absolute perfection and divine completeness.
Oh.
Therefore, the Jod was assigned as the symbol, the starting letter for Yahweh, the supreme deity of the Jews, The biological reality, the geometry, the math, and the literal name of God were completely, inextricably linked.
Okay, let me pause you there because I want to make sure you listening right now are grasping how incredibly layered this is, because it reminds me a lot of how we view computer code today.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Think about the green falling text in the matrix. When a programmer looks at a screen of code, they don't just see ones and zeros, and ironically, the foundation of all our digital life literally is ones and zeros.
Which is a crazy parallel in itself.
Right. But they see the underlying architecture that dictates the entire reality of the software. If you change a 1 to a 0 in the code, the sky in the video game turns red instead of blue.
Yes, exactly.
For the ancients, looking at the numbers 1 and 0, or the number 10, was exactly like looking at the source code of the universe. They believed these numbers were actively dictating the physical reality they experienced.
That is a perfect analogy because to them it wasn't just math, it was magic. Or rather, magic was just math they hadn't fully mapped yet. And once you start looking for the source code, you start seeing it everywhere, especially when you look up at the sky.
Moving from the earth to the heavens.
Right. If the number 10 represented the complete generation of life on Earth, the number 7 became the ultimate rhythm of the cosmos. And this obsession with the number 7 completely derives from the lunar cycle.
Which makes sense, because the moon is arguably the most obvious shape-shifting thing in the night sky. When the sun does its thing, it's consistent, but the moon is always changing.
Exactly. The moon was known anciently as the Great Regulator, or the Measurer. It goes through its entire cycle of phases in approximately 28 days.
Okay, 28 days.
Early astronomers, who were, also the early priests, divided that 28-day cycle into 4 distinct, visually obvious phases. You have the dark new moon, the first quarter half moon, the full bright moon, and last quarter half moon.
And 28 divided by 4 gives you exactly 7.
There it is. So the number 7 became intrinsically tied to the heartbeat of the heavens. Every 7th day marked a noticeable visual shift in the sky.
And it wasn't just the sky they were measuring, right? The biological mirroring here is what makes this so powerful to me. They noticed that this 28-day lunar cycle strangely mirrored the biological menstrual cycle of women.
Yes, which, again, tied right back to their obsession with fertility and survival. It's the microcosm mirroring the macrocosm.
As above, so below.
Exactly. Because of this undeniable biological connection, the moon became heavily associated with femininity, water, and the generation of life. The number 7, marking the quarters of the moon's cycle, became a number of profound cosmic power.
And we see this everywhere in ancient religion.
Oh, everywhere. We see this clearly in ancient Sumeria, long before the Hebrew texts were even written. The day of the full moon was called Shabbatu.
Wait, Shabbatu, like the Sabbath.
Yes. In their texts, it is described as the day of the heart, the day when the heart of the gods is appeased. Work was laid aside. People gathered to celebrate and rest. The 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th days of the month were marked by religious services and the strict cessation of physical labor.
Wait, really? So the entire concept of the 7-day week and, taking the weekend off the Sabbath isn't just a religious mandate? It's a direct holdover from ancient Mesopotamians tracking the 4 phases of the moon.
Absolutely. The astronomical root of the 7-day week is undeniable. It was an attempt to synchronize human societal behavior with the mathematical behavior of the sky.
That is wild. I mean, we literally organize our entire modern corporate work week around ancient moon worship.
Pretty much, yeah.
And once they started mapping human biology to the moon, they didn't stop at 28 days. This leads to another massive numerical obsession that Busenbark points out, which is the number 40.
Right, the gestation period.
Yeah. If the moon regulates the cycle of fertility, they naturally started measuring the actual time of human gestation, the time it takes for a fetus to fully develop from conception to birth. And that period is roughly 280 days.
Which is exactly 10 of those 28-day lunar months.
Right, 10 of them. Completeness.
Yeah.
And 280 days is also exactly 40 weeks. So the number 40 transcends just being a medical measurement of pregnancy. It becomes the ultimate universal symbol for any period of necessary gestation.
Yes, any period of trial or hardship, testing, and eventual rebirth. The examples of this in ancient literature are absolutely staggering.
Busenbark just rapid fires them in the book.
He lays them out with such clarity. Because 40 represented this painful period of waiting in the dark before a new life emerges, it was applied to almost every significant mythic or religious event involving a profound trial.
Like the flood.
Yes, we have the 40 days and 40 nights of the deluge Noah's flood, washing the world clean for a rebirth. We have the Israelites enduring 40 years of wandering in the desolate wilderness before entering the Promised Land.
Right, gestating as a nation.
Exactly. We have Moses spending 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai receiving the law.
And it crosses over into the New Testament perfectly, too.
Yeah.
You have Jesus fasting for 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, being tempted right before his public ministry is born.
Yes, the 40 days is the preparation.
And then there are 40 days between his resurrection from the tomb and his final ascension. But what really blew my mind reading this is that this wasn't just an isolated Judeo-Christian trope. It was a universal mathematical shorthand.
Completely universal.
Busenbark notes the 40 days of mourning for the death of Jacob. And in the older Persian traditions, there were 40 days of sacrifice in the mysteries of Mithra.
And 40 nights of mourning in the Greek mysteries of Persephone. It's literally everywhere.
It really is. It's like whenever you see the number 40 in an ancient text, it is almost certainly not a literal historical measurement of time.
No, it's a mathematical allegory. The author is basically winking at the initiated reader, signaling to them, hey, this character is currently in the womb of tribulation, and they are about to be reborn.
It changes the way you read everything. It really does. But this desire to map divine concepts onto mathematics gets even more complex. It evolved from simple counting into incredibly sophisticated sacred geometry.
Yes, moving from arithmetic to geometry.
Busenbark dives really deep into the theories of Pythagoras here. Now, we all know Pythagoras from high school math, the whole a squared plus b squared equals c squared thing. But Pythagoras was a mystic, wasn't he?
Oh, completely. He basically taught that geometry was a divine science. It was the actual blueprint the great architect used to build reality.
He believed that certain geometric forms held immense mystic importance, wholly apart from their, practical structural properties. And the most famous of these is the 3-4-5 right-angled triangle.
The famous 3-4-5.
Okay, let's break this down physically for a second, just so everyone can picture it. If you take a line that is exactly 3 units long, let's say 3 feet, and you stand it straight up,
Okay.
then at the bottom corner, you connect a horizontal line that is exactly 4 feet long. The diagonal distance between the two endpoints will perfectly, inevitably be exactly 5 feet long.
Every single time.
And the corner they make at the bottom will be a perfect, flawless 90-degree angle. It is a fundamental law of physics. It's how ancient builders made perfectly square corners for pyramids and temples.
But they didn't just see structural engineering here. They saw family drama.
They did. They mapped the entire generation of life onto this specific triangle.
Well, the perpendicular line, the upright shaft, standing 3 units tall, signified the male principle. The horizontal baseline, lying flat at 4 units, signified the female principle.
Okay, the 1 and the 0 again, basically.
Exactly. And the hypotenuse, the longest diagonal line connecting the two at 5 units, signified the child, the inevitable product of their union.
Wait, so they took the 1 and 0 concept we talked about earlier and basically upgraded it to high-definition geometry.
Exactly. And this wasn't just abstract philosophy, it was the literal framework for their pantheons. Look at Egypt. In Egypt, this specific 3-4-5 triangle was the conventional sacred representation of their supreme triad.
The gods themselves.
Yes, Osiris was the upright male line of 3. Isis was the horizontal female line of 4. And Horus, the divine offspring, was the hypotenuse of 5. The theology was structurally sound geometry.
That is so cool. And we see this geometric theology deeply embedded in the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition, too. Busenbark points out this incredible linguistic and geometric overlap in Hebrew that just blew me away.
Oh, the fire and water symbolism.
Yes. Take the ancient concept of heaven. In Hebrew, the word for fire is esh, and the word for water is maim. Now, geometrically, fire was considered the active male principle. It was represented by an equilateral triangle pointing upwards, imitating a flame rising into the sky.
Right, reaching up.
And water was the passive female principle, represented by a triangle pointing downwards, like a cup of, the downward flow of gravity.
Right. Now, what's fascinating here is when you linguistically combine the letters for fire, esh, and water maim, you form the Hebrew word shemain.
Which translates to heaven.
Yes, heaven. This word was so sacred it was often used as a reverent substitute for the true name of God. But the visual, geometric representation of this combination is what is truly profound.
I love this part.
If you physically overlap the upward-pointing triangle of fire and the downward-pointing triangle of water, what do you get?
You get the 6-pointed star, the Star of David.
Exactly. To the ancient mind, this symbol didn't start as a national flag or a purely religious emblem. It represented the perfect alchemical union of fire and water, male and female, active and passive.
It was the ultimate divine harmony.
Yes, it represented the sum total of the universe operating in perfect balance.
It's just incredible how practical these abstract concepts actually were.
Yeah.
But, okay, before we move off numbers entirely, we have to talk about how this math sometimes got completely out of hand due to calendar drift.
Oh, calendar drift was a nightmare for them.
Right, because observing the moon is great, but it's messy. A lunar cycle isn't exactly 28 days, it's about 29 and a half. So early lunar calendars were constantly falling out of sync with the actual solar seasons.
And if you're an agrarian society, that's life or death.
Exactly. If you're a farmer and your calendar says it's spring, so you plant your seeds, but it's still physically snowing outside, you have a massive survival problem. Your tribe starves.
Yes, calendar drift was an existential threat. To fix this, different cultures experimented with different mathematical models. The Babylonians, who were just peerless astronomers and mathematicians, sometimes utilized a system tracking a 27-day visible lunar cycle to adjust their counts.
And when you start playing with that number 27, it unlocks a completely different, almost terrifying mathematical coincidence that reverberated across the entire ancient world.
It really is an unbelievable mathematical coincidence.
Right, because if you take 4 of those 27-day lunar months, you get exactly 108 days. Now, on its own, maybe that's just a number. But the Babylonians operated on a base 60 sexagesimal system. They loved multiples and fractions of 60.
Yes, they did.
10 times 108 gives you 1,080. And 1,080 times 80 gives you 86,400. Which completely mind-bendingly is the exact, precise number of seconds in a 24-hour day.
And this mathematical ghost, this number 108, it travels. As you move east into ancient India, 108 takes on profound, foundational spiritual significance. In Hindu theology, 108 becomes the mystic number of the supreme creator god, Brahma.
And you still see it today.
You do.
If you look at traditional mala beads, the rosary used by Brahmins and Buddhists to count mantras during meditation, there are exactly 108 beads on the string.
Every single one.
Busenbark quotes ancient texts stating that by putting on these 108 beads, a person literally becomes the deity incarnate in the flesh. The number signifies the total number of the Vedas, the ultimate source of wisdom.
It's this massive cross-cultural mathematical phenomenon. They discovered this specific number while trying to fix their farming calendars by watching the moon, and centuries later, it's woven into the very physical fabric of how millions of people meditate and pray.
It perfectly illustrates how, in the ancient mind, there was absolutely zero separation between science and religion.
None whatsoever.
The astronomer mapping the lunar drift was the priest. The mathematician calculating the angles of a temple was the theologian. There was no secular world. Everything was divine data.
Which I think provides us with the necessary context to move from the math written in the sand to the epic narratives written in the sky.
Yes, let's look up.
Chapter 18 of Busenbark's work tackles astrology. Now, today, astrology is largely relegated to, horoscope apps and newspaper columns. It's about personality traits, are you a Gemini, that kind of thing.
Right, it's pop culture.
But in its origin, astrology was the absolute life or death conviction that all earthly activity was directly controlled by the physical movements of the heavenly bodies.
Right, we have to wipe away our modern bias here. Just put yourself in the shoes of an ancient herder. You look up and you observe a very simple, brutal reality. When the sun is high in the sky and stays out for a long time, it is warm, the ice melts, plants grow, the animals reproduce, life is good.
Life is abundant.
But when the sun starts sinking lower in the sky, when the days get incredibly short and dark, it is freezing. The plants die, the animals starve. People freeze to death.
The connection isn't mystical, it is empirical.
Exactly. The sun literally grants life and brings death. So naturally, you begin to chart its course with obsessive religious devotion.
And out of that obsession grows the most important foundational narrative in all of human history. The allegory of the seasons.
The ultimate story.
This is the storytelling framework that early humanity built around the annual cycle of the sun. They mapped out the path the sun appeared to travel across the background of the stars, a path we call the ecliptic.
Okay, the ecliptic.
They divided this circular path into 12 sections, or constellations. This is the zodiac. As the Earth orbits the sun over the course of a year, from our perspective on the ground, the sun appears to move through these 12 signs, spending roughly 1 month inside the house of each constellation.
And this is where the drama comes in. Think about how you feel when your phone battery hits 1%. You panic, right?
Pure panic.
Because you are about to lose your connection to the world. For an ancient farmer in the northern hemisphere, watching the sun sink lower and lower into the southern sky every day throughout November and December was that exact same panic,
Yeah.
but for their literal survival.
The days are getting colder. The darkness is literally defeating the light.
Allegorically speaking, the Prince of Darkness, or the Serpent of Winter, is winning the cosmic war against the God of Light.
And this cosmic battle culminates on a very specific date, the winter solstice, which falls around December 22nd.
The darkest day.
On this day, the sun reaches its absolute lowest point on the southern horizon. It is at its weakest. Its rays provide the least heat. To the ancient observer, the sun god has been defeated. He is dying.
But the astronomical mechanics of what happens next are crucial. For roughly 3 days, December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, the sun appears to stand completely still on the horizon.
It doesn't move.
Right. It stops sinking, but it doesn't immediately begin to rise northward again. To the naked eye, watching from a stone circle or a primitive observatory, the sun is dead. It is trapped in the tomb of the underworld for 3 days.
But then, on the night of December 24th, heading into the early hours of December 25th, the sky shifts. At midnight, the constellation of Virgo the Virgin rises above the eastern horizon. And as the morning of December 25th breaks, the sun finally moves its first measurable degree northward. The days are essentially going to start getting longer. The sun has been reborn.
The Virgin gives birth to the new sun god. The light has returned. I mean, just imagine the relief, the celebration. Your survival is guaranteed for another year.
It was the ultimate salvation.
The story isn't over because on December 25th, the sun is still weak. It's just a newborn baby. It's freezing outside. The real victory, the actual salvation of the earth, doesn't happen until the spring.
Right. The young sun has to grow stronger and stronger, battling its way upward through the winter months until we finally reach the vernal equinox on March 21st.
The vernal equinox. This is the big one.
The vernal equinox is the absolute turning point of the ancient year. On this specific day, the sun crosses the celestial equator. The hours of daylight and the hours of darkness are exactly equal.
A day of perfect balance.
It is a fleeting moment of perfect cosmic balance. But from this day forward, the light will physically exceed the darkness. The sun has finally fully redeemed the world from the underworld of winter.
Okay, and this ties into the terminology they use too.
Yes. Because the sun literally crosses over the equator, this astronomical event was anciently known as the Passover, or the crossification.
Crossification, wow.
It is the moment vegetation begins to bloom anew. Life is resurrected from the dead soil.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back here, or at least ask the question everyone is screaming at their speakers right now.
Fair enough, go ahead.
So what does this all mean? Are you saying that these epic, deeply emotional stories we grew up hearing, gods dying and rising again, epic battles between light and darkness, virgin births, are you saying these weren't historical events or deep spiritual revelations, but literally just a glorified farmer's almanac? Did they just map weather patterns and slap a story on it?
Well, it is rooted in a farmer's almanac, yes, but we absolutely must not reduce it to just that. It wasn't just storytelling for fun. It was an incredibly sophisticated mechanism for civilizational survival.
How so?
Look at it this way. Before written language, before libraries or, digital hard drives, the sky was the only eternal, indestructible canvas available to humanity.
The original hard drive.
Exactly. How do you ensure that your descendants, 10 generations down the line, remember exactly when to plant the weed? How do you make sure they remember when the river is going to flood, or what the moral, legal framework of your society should be during the harsh winter months? You encode that vital survival data into the stars.
Because human beings don't remember dry data. We remember stories.
Exactly. We are inherently storytelling creatures. If I give you a list of numbers, you'll forget them by tomorrow. If I tell you a dramatic story about a hero fighting a monster, you'll remember it forever.
That is so true.
So, the ancient astrologer priests anthropomorphized the solar cycles. The sun wasn't just a glowing disk of gas. He was a dynamic hero, a savior, battling the serpentine demons of the dark. Storing agricultural and moral data in these epic anthropomorphic stories was the ultimate information retention system. It ensured the survival of the species.
That is brilliant. You wrap the data in a myth, so the data survives the centuries.
Yes.
And
Yes.
once you see that mechanism, you realize these solar myths are absolutely everywhere in classical literature.
Oh, they are ubiquitous.
Look at Hercules. He's arguably the most famous testosterone-fueled action hero of Greek mythology. He performs his famous 12 labors. But wait, there are 12 signs of the zodiac.
Yep, the 12 signs.
And as early as the 5th century BC, classical writers were already noting that the 12 labors of Hercules were simply an allegory for the sun's annual passage through the 12 constellations.
It's a star map.
When Hercules fights the Nemean lion, it's the sun passing through the constellation of Leo in the heat of midsummer. When he fights the multi-headed Hydra, it's the constellation of Cancer.
Yeah.
It's literally an astronomical star map disguised as a blockbuster action-adventure story.
It is, and this allegorical framework is heavily present in the biblical narratives as well. Busenbark points to the story of Samson from the Book of Judges to illustrate this.
Samson and Delilah.
Right. Firstly, the etymology of the name itself is a dead giveaway. The Hebrew name Shimshon, or Samson, directly translates to little son or son man.
Really? I didn't know that.
He is from the tribe of Dan, which was a title often bestowed upon the ancient sun god Shamash. And what is Samson's defining characteristic?
His miraculous strength, which is entirely dependent on his long hair.
Exactly. And in global solar mythology, hair consistently represents the rays of the sun. Think about the sun high in the sky at midsummer. Its hair is long, its rays are intense, and its strength is unmatched.
The sun in its prime.
But when the winter approaches, the sun's rays grow weak and short. In the Samson narrative, Delilah represents the darkness, or the encroaching winter months. She lulls the sun to sleep and cuts his hair.
Oh my God.
She strips him of his solar rays, rendering him blind and weak, grinding at the mill in the dark prison of winter.
Wait, I have to challenge that a bit. You could argue that the hair thing is just a coincidence. Couldn't Samson have been a real historical tribal leader whose exploits just got exaggerated over time? I mean, you can't just map a bad haircut to the winter solstice and say it's all astrology.
You could argue that, if it were just the hair. But Busenbark highlights the Kabbalistic math woven into the very genealogy of the story, which elevates it beyond mere historical exaggeration.
Okay, let's hear the math.
Let's look at Samson's father. His name is Manoah. If you apply the ancient Jewish system of gematria, where Hebrew letters hold specific numerical values, the name Manoch has a strict mathematical value of 104.
Okay, 104. Why does that matter?
Because 104 is exactly 4 times 26. And 26, in the Kabbalistic tradition, is the sacred, highly guarded numerical value of Jahve, the supreme god.
No way.
Yes. The math is literally coded into the names of the characters to signify divine generation. It's an incredibly sophisticated layering of solar allegory, the sun losing its rays in winter, stacked on top of sacred foundational geometry. The authors were signaling to the initiated reader that this is a cosmic story, not a local police report.
Wow. Okay, the math proves the allegory. It's locked in. And to truly visualize how widespread, established, and ancient this exact framework was, Busenbark takes us to the Egyptian temple of Luxor.
Oh, this is one of his compelling pieces of physical evidence.
This temple was built by Pharaoh Amenhotep III roughly 1,600 years before the Common Era. That is, centuries before the foundational texts of Judaism or Christianity were written.
Long before.
And on the inner walls of the Holy of Holies within this massive temple, there's a series of 4 carved scenes depicting the birth of the sun god Horus. And the parallels to later religious narratives are just visually staggering.
They are. And again, to reiterate our lens here, we are merely reporting the physical archaeological findings and the historical comparisons made by Busenbark regarding ancient art. We are tracing the lineage of a motif.
Right. We are making theological claims, but just picture walking through this dimly lit ancient Egyptian corridor. In the first massive scene carved on the wall, you see the god Tot. He is acting as the scribe, the messenger of the gods.
He is the announcer.
And he is speaking to a young virgin. He is announcing to her that she is going to give birth to a divine son. It is undeniably a 3,500-year-old annunciation scene.
It is. Moving to the second scene, the carving shows the god Neph and the goddess Hathor. They are holding Ankh crosses, the iconic Egyptian symbol, representing the key of life directly to the head and the nostrils of the Virgin Mother-to-be.
What does that signify?
Well, this is a very specific theological statement. It signifies that her impregnation is happening via divine spirit, the breath of life, not by physical, biological means. It is an immaculate conception, and her pregnancy is clearly indicated in the carving by her swelling form.
Then you look at the third scene. The mother is seated on a traditional midwife stool. She is given birth, and the newly born babe is being held up and adored by attending figures.
The adoration of the child.
And then the fourth and final scene. The enthroned divine child is receiving homage from both gods and mortal men. But the detail that just stops you in your track standing behind the god Neph are three distinct figures.
This is the part that gets people.
They are three magi, or kings. They are kneeling in reverence, and each one of them is holding a gift in their right hand, offering it to the newborn Savior while holding an ink cross of life in their left.
16 centuries before the birth of Christ, we see the angelic annunciation, the immaculate conception by divine spirit, the birth of the Savior, and the adoration by three kings bearing gifts.
It's all right there in stone.
What this demonstrates, emphatically, is that the narrative framework of a divine Savior born to a virgin, honored by celestial signs, was an established, fully developed astrological and theological motif long before it appeared in the later texts of the Near East.
It was a template.
Exactly. It was the standard, universally understood language used by ancient cultures to describe the annual miracle of the sun being reborn at the winter solstice.
It's like discovering that a movie you thought was totally original is actually a shot-for-shot remake of an indie film from 50 years ago.
Ah, yeah, exactly.
It doesn't mean the new movie is bad. It just means it has a deep, inherited lineage. And speaking of vast stretches of time, we have to make a major shift here.
Let's do it.
Everything we've just talked about, the dying sun, the winter solstice, the virgin birth, it all operates on the annual cycle. The sun moving through the 12 signs of the zodiac every single year. That's the fast ticking of the cosmic clock.
The day-to-day survival clock.
But in Chapter 19, Busenbark takes us out of the yearly cycle and into the ages of the gods. This is the incredibly slow, almost imperceptible ticking of the celestial clock. And it is based on an astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes.
Right. This is where ancient astronomy truly flexes its muscles. And frankly, it leaves modern historians baffled as to how they figured it out.
It's a huge mystery.
We know the Earth spins on its axis, giving us day and night. But the Earth isn't perfectly stable as it spins. Because of the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun on the Earth's equatorial bulge, the Earth has a very, very slight wobble to it.
Like a top.
Yes, think of a spinning top on a table that is just beginning to lose its momentum. The top of the axis starts to trace a slow circle. Because of this incredibly slow wobble, the backdrop of the stars against which we view the sun is constantly but imperceptibly shifting.
Right, and here's where the math gets genuinely intimidating. If you go outside on the morning of the vernal equinox, March 21st, that sacred day of balance and resurrection we talked about, and you look at the exact spot on the eastern horizon where the sun rises, it will be rising inside a specific zodiac constellation.
That specific house.
But because of that massive Earth wobble, the sun doesn't rise in that exact same starry background forever. It very, very slowly drifts backward through the zodiac signs over the centuries.
So slow.
It takes roughly 2,160 years for the sunrise on the spring equinox to drift completely through just one single zodiac sign. And it takes nearly 26,000 years to make a full 360-degree cycle through all 12.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Stop and think about the scale of observation required to notice this.
It's unfathomable.
A single human astronomer could watch the sky meticulously every day of their entire life and never notice the shift. It is too slow. To realize that the home of the spring sun was slowly changing required centuries, perhaps millennia, of continuous, meticulously recorded, multi-generational observation.
They were passing this data down for thousands of years.
It means these ancient priesthoods were maintaining unbroken astronomical records spanning huge stretches of time.
To go back to my matrix analogy, discovering the precession of the equinoxes was like discovering a massive background patch, downloading in real time over thousands of years, subtly rewriting the operating system of the sky.
Exactly. And because the sun's position at the spring equinox, that moment of ultimate resurrection and life, was considered the most sacred position in the sky, whatever constellation housed the sun at that specific time became the absolute dominant symbol of their religion for that entire 2,000-year epoch.
Which is what we call an astrological age.
Yes. This 2,160-year period is an astrological age.
So let's actually trace this massive clock backward and see how it completely rewrote human religion. Let's look at the period roughly from 4000 BC to 2000 BC.
Okay, the deep past.
During this vast epoch, the sun on the spring equinox was rising squarely in the constellation of Taurus, the bull. This is the age of Taurus. And what do we see when we look at the archaeology and mythology of that specific era? Bull worship is absolutely everywhere.
Everywhere you look.
You have the sacred Apis bull in Egypt, the massive winged bulls guarding the gates of Assyria, the terrifying minotaur at the center of the labyrinth in Crete. The bull wasn't just a strong animal. It was the supreme symbol of the divine, because it was the literal astronomical house of the resurrected sun.
But the celestial clock kept ticking. Around the year 2000 BC, give or take, the slow wobble of the Earth caused the sun to cross the imaginary boundary line in the sky. It moved out of Taurus and began rising in the constellation of Aries, the ram, or the lamb.
The age of Aries begins.
This inaugurated the age of Aries, and suddenly, humanity had a massive theological problem. The supreme symbol of God the Bull was no longer astronomically accurate. The religious symbolism of the entire civilized world had to shift to match the new reality of the sky.
They had to update the religion.
Yes. The old bull gods were overthrown, often violently in the mythologies, and the ram became the new mandated symbol of salvation.
And we see this transition depicted perfectly and dramatically in the biblical narrative of Exodus. Think about it. Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with the new law, and what does he find the Israelites doing?
Worshipping the golden calf.
They are worshiping a golden calf. They are clinging to a relic of the old age of Taurus. Moses is absolutely furious. He destroys the calf idol. And what immediately becomes the central commanded animal of sacrifice for this new Jewish religion, the ram.
The Paschal lamb.
Specifically, the mandatory sacrifice of the Paschal lamb at Passover, which astronomically occurs right at the vernal equinox. The transition from the bull to the ram wasn't just a change in cultural taste. It was a strict astronomical mandate. They were upgrading their theology to reflect the current, updated state of the cosmos.
It was an astronomical software update, and the clock never stops. After roughly another 2,000 years of the ram, right around the time of the birth of the Roman Empire and the dawn of the Common Era, the sun transitioned again.
Moving to the next sign.
It slowly drifted out of the constellation of Aries and crossed the border into the constellation of Pisces, the fishes. We entered the age of Pisces. And what symbol becomes universally, inextricably associated with the massive new religion that rises precisely in this era? Christianity.
The fish.
The fish.
Yes. It's hiding in plain sight. Long before the cross became the dominant, accepted symbol of Christianity, the earliest persecuted Christians used the ichthys, the simple fish symbol, to secretly identify each other.
Right, drawing it in the dirt.
The early believers were literally called pasiculi by outside observers, which is Latin for little fishes. Think of the metaphors Jesus tells his disciples to drop their nets and he will make them fishers of men. He performs the miracle of feeding the multitudes with 2 fishes.
Which is a direct, unavoidable visual reference to the 2 specific fish that make up the astrological constellation of Pisces.
Exactly. The overarching symbolism of the world's newly dominant faith, perfectly aligned with the newly dawning astrological age in which it was born.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if you let the weight of that sink in, it completely changes how we must read ancient apocalyptic prophecy.
What do you mean, like end-of-the-world stuff?
Correct. Yes. When ancient texts across various cultures spoke of the terrifying end of the world or the destruction of the old order or the coming of a new savior to judge the earth, they were very often not predicting the literal physical destruction of the planet by fire or flood.
They were just talking about the sky changing.
They were talking about the end of an astrological age. When the age of Taurus ended, that specific world died. Its bull gods were judged, found wanting, and cast out, and a new world, the age of Aries, was born to replace it.
Wow.
The apocalyptic language of the ancients, full of stars falling and skies tearing open, was often just the highly dramatic, allegorical language of astronomy.
It's the ultimate out with the old, in with the new, just operating on a terrifyingly slow 2,000-year schedule.
Precisely.
And seeing how these massive cycles dictate human belief brings us to the final and perhaps most complex piece of our deep dive today, the Rule of Three.
The Trinity.
In chapters 20 through 23.3, Busenbark rigorously traces the ancient concept of the Holy Three, or the Trinity. Now, for most of us, when we hear the word Trinity, our brains immediately default to the Christian doctrine Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We think of the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, where bishops argued and the theology was officially, legally formalized.
A formalized doctrine.
But Busenbark strips that away and shows that the roots of a triune God go way, way deeper, right into the very bedrock of the ancient geometry and biology we've been discussing this whole time.
We have to understand that the idea of a threefold Godhead was not a late theological invention. It was nearly universal in antiquity, millennia before the Common Era. We can trace it all the way back to the Babylonians.
Back to the math.
Back to the math. As we established earlier, the Babylonians based their understanding of divinity purely on celestial mathematics. They surveyed the universe and divided it into three massive, observable, physical realms: the starry heavens above, the physical earth below, and the dark sea or underworld beneath the earth.
Heaven, earth,
Well,
underworld.
And naturally, they assigned a supreme triad of gods to rule these three realms. You had Anu, the father god representing the heavens, holding the supreme mathematical number 60, then Bel, representing the earth, holding the number 50, and Ea, the god of the deep waters, holding the number 40.
And what's fascinating is that this supreme triad was almost too abstract for daily worship, wasn't it?
It was too distant.
So they created a secondary, more visible triad that actually ruled the day-to-day lives and fortunes of the people. They had the moon, which, as we know, ruled the 28-day cycle, was given the number 30. Then the sun, the bringer of light and heat, was given the number 20. And Venus, the bright evening star, was given the number 15.
The very concept of God from the earliest dawn of civilization was inherently plural. The divine was inherently divided into three functioning distinct parts that operated together as one unified whole to keep the universe running.
And we see this triune concept expressed purely through geometry as well, right? Completely separate from anthropomorphic gods.
Yes. In profound Hindu symbology, when they attempt to represent the supreme, unnameable creator Brahma, the ancient emblem of this trinity and unity is a simple, equilateral triangle inscribed perfectly within a circle.
There's the geometry again.
The circle, as we know, represents eternity, the unending universe, the zero of infinite female generation we talked about at the very beginning. The triangle inscribed inside it represents the threefold nature of the divine active power operating within that endless eternity.
Okay, but what are those three powers? Why is a triangle the default shape of God across all these different disconnected ancient cultures?
Because in almost every ancient culture, the theology ultimately boils down to the unavoidable biological reality of existence. The three powers are always in some form: the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer.
The cycle of life.
Or when mapped directly onto the human experience, which is the only reference point they really had: the male, the female, and the offspring. It brings us right back to Pythagoras and that 3, 4, 5 right-angled triangle.
Oh, right. Osiris, Isis, and Horus.
The perpendicular upright shaft is Osiris, the creator father. The horizontal base is Isis, the preserver mother. And the hypotenuse is Horus, the offspring, who represents the future and the continuation of the cycle.
It's so concrete.
The concept of the Trinity didn't begin as a highly intellectual, metaphysical debate about the abstract substance of a spiritual being. It began as a physical, geometric representation of how biological life is actually made. Two opposing forces combine to create a third, distinct entity, and those three are bound together inextricably in one family unit.
That brings it so incredibly down to earth. But, okay, Busenbark makes a claim about how this triad concept infiltrated Judaism that I really need you to clarify because it feels incredibly controversial.
The Ark of the Covenant chapter.
Yes. He spends a significant amount of time in chapter 23 discussing the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark is the most sacred, holy object in the entire Hebrew Bible. It is the literal, physical dwelling place of Yahweh on earth. If you touched it, you died.
Extremely sacred.
But Busenbark asks a structural question. What was actually inside it? Because before Moses supposedly placed the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments in it at Mount Sinai, the text of Exodus mentions that it contains something called the testimony, or the eduth.
Right, and this is where we have to look closely at comparative ancient religions. Busenbark claims, and he cites linguistic and anthropological parallels to support this, that this original eduth was not a written legal document like stone tablets.
What was it then?
He argues it was actually physical, sacred objects symbolizing the male generative principle and the female generative principle.
Man, hold on. Are you saying Busenbark believed the holiest artifact in Judaism, the Ark of the Covenant, originally contained ancient phallic and yoni fertility symbols instead of the Ten Commandments? That is a massive claim to just drop.
It is a massive claim, but he arrives at it by comparing the Ark to the sacred artifacts of surrounding cultures. He points out that the Ark itself functioned identically to the argas, or sacred boat-shaped chests of other ancient faiths.
Like which ones?
Like those found in Egyptian temples or carried in Hindu processions. These argas almost universally contained literal, physical symbols of the phallus and the yoni, the lingam and the yoni. The chest itself represented the womb of nature, carrying the divine creative power safely through the chaos of the world.
Like Noah's Ark carrying life over the destructive floodwaters.
Exactly like that. Busenbark posits that the early Hebrew ark served the exact same anthropological function. The presence of Jahwe, acting as the ultimate creator, the preserver, and the eventual destroyer, hovered between the golden cherubim directly over this hidden physical representation of life's biological origins.
So he's arguing that even in the strictest, most monotheistic religion of the ancient world, the hidden core of their holiest object was still fundamentally rooted in that ancient triune biological geometry, the male, the female, and the divine spark of generation between them.
Precisely. The overarching point Busenbark is making across all these chapters is one of profound synthesis.
Pulling it all together.
Yes. When you look at the entire landscape, from the Kabbalah's obsession with the geometry of the numbers 10 and 7, to the zodiac's epic winter allegory of the dying and rising sun, to the vast 2,000-year astrological ages dictating the fall of bulls and the rise of rams, to the geometric triads of the ancient pantheons, it is not a collection of random, disconnected superstitions.
It's all connected.
It is a singular, continuous, evolving thread of human logic. It is a manifestation of humanity's desperate, incredible, beautiful attempt to mirror the macrocosm, the massive, terrifying but orderly mathematical universe in the microcosm of human life, human biology, and human religion. They looked up at the stars, they looked down at their own bodies, and they concluded that it was all written by the exact same mathematical hand.
It's just staggering when you pull all the threads together like that. So I have to ask you listening right now, what stands out to you from all of this? Because for me, it is just how incredibly practical, survival-based, and earthbound the origins of our highest, most abstract theological concepts actually are.
Very earthbound.
We sit around today and argue vehemently about the metaphysical nature of the Trinity, or we fight over the exact proper date to celebrate a holy festival, completely disconnected from the reality that we are, at our core, arguing about the ancient geometry of a right-angled triangle and the day the sun finally stops sinking in the dark winter sky. We took the desperate physics and the life-saving astronomy of our ancestors. We completely forgot the math, but we fiercely kept the characters of the story.
Which brings us to the ultimate, perhaps uncomfortable realization of this entire exploration. This raises an important question for us today.
What's that?
If we accept the data, if we acknowledge that our ancient ancestors built their entire societal, legal, and religious frameworks, the very bedrock of their reality, based on their limited understanding of the physical stars, the agricultural seasons, and primitive geometry, what invisible stars are we following right now? What foundational modern myths, what completely unexamined allegories are we blindly building our current society upon, simply because we don't realize we're looking at a story instead of the raw data? We like to think we are hyper-advanced, that we've completely outgrown the frightened astrologer priests of ancient Babylon.
But maybe we haven't.
Perhaps we haven't changed at all. Perhaps we've just changed the names of the constellations we worship.
That is heavy. That is the kind of thought that keeps you up at night. And that is exactly why we do these deep dives. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If this deep dive changed the way you look at your calendar, the stars, or even just the number 10, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment down below telling us which ancient symbol or mathematical connection absolutely blew your mind the most. Keep questioning everything, look up at the sky tonight with just a bit more reverence, and we'll see you in the next one.